26-year-old female. Last year, I moved into my first house after living in an apartment for a few years. It was an older house in the neighborhood outside the city that I worked in. I really liked it a lot and was excited to have a front yard to plant flowers in and a back patio to sit out and enjoy nice days. As for the house itself, it had 2 floors and was a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. When I moved in, I saw my next-door neighbor outside in the front yard. He watched me move my stuff in as my parents and friend helped me. At one point, he offered to help us. The guy said his name was Jerry and just came off as a little creepy to me. He was an older guy who, for whatever reason, just had a sort of scary look to him. We turned down his offer because we didn't need the help, and the guy went back on his front porch and just watched us the rest of the time. The next day, when I was all moved in, I was by myself in my living room watching TV. I then heard a knock coming from my front door. I looked at the clock and saw that it was almost midnight. I looked out my window then and noticed Jerry was standing there. He was on my front step and then looked directly over to me and waved. I didn't know he could see me in the window, and I wasn't planning on answering the door this late, but after I knew he saw me, I figured I had to. I walked over to the door and opened it. Jerry asked me if I was having a good time watching TV. I told him I was just about to go to bed and asked him why he was knocking on my door so late. Jerry said he wanted to invite me over for dinner the next night as a welcoming to me for moving in. I really didn't want to and told him that I was busy the next night. At the time I wasn't, but I didn't want to go to his house. He seemed disappointed, but then said maybe another time. I said yes, maybe another time just to be nice, and then he walked away. I then turned off all my lights and went to bed. I couldn't help but feel creeped out by this guy. The fact that he knew that I was watching TV meant that he had looked through my window, and him knocking on my door at almost midnight was really weird. The next day, I went to work, and afterwards got food with one of my friends. I went home after that, and I would say it was about 7 p.m. or so when I arrived. When I got inside my house, I took off my shoes and began walking to my bedroom. Just then, I heard a noise coming from down the hall near the kitchen. There was definitely somebody inside my house. I heard the footsteps coming towards me in the hallway, and didn't want to stay there and wait to see who it was, so I ran back to my front door and didn't even bother putting my shoes back on. I ran outside and got to my car. Once I was inside my car, I backed out of the driveway. As I was starting to drive away, I saw my front door open in my house behind me. I saw Jerry exiting my house and sort of running back to his. I pulled over my car and called the police. I sat on the other side of the road and waited for them to arrive. When they did, they went to Jerry and confronted him. He admitted to breaking into my house and was caught. After that, I didn't have to worry about him anymore. A few months later, someone else moved in, and since then, it's been great. I used to live by myself in an apartment in the city. From just about the very day I moved in, strange things started happening. I think it was like my 3rd or 4th night there. I got a knock on my door at almost 2 o'clock in the morning. I opened it up and saw nobody there. I looked all around the hall, but there wasn't anybody in sight. Then, the next day, I saw on the floor outside my door was just a cover page of a magazine. The guy in the front of the magazine had his eyes poked out, and there was a large X over his face. I was confused and figured maybe there was a kid pranking me or something like that. Over the next few weeks, things like this continued to happen. Sometimes I would hear knocks coming from the other side of my wall in the living room. Other times I would get knocks on my front door or other weird types of mail showing up on my front step, things that I didn't ask for. During the day, I would occasionally see people coming or going from their apartments. The guy that lived next door to me was a younger looking adult and seemed like just an average guy. One day as I was leaving though, I thought I saw him approaching my door, and when I stepped outside, he quickly walked back inside of his room and slammed the door when he saw me. I noticed that he appeared to be holding a magazine or something like that in his hand, and based on the evidence, I thought he might be behind the things that were happening. I wanted to get to the bottom of it, so I decided to go to his apartment and confront him. I wouldn't do it if I wasn't sure that he was behind it, but at the time I was about 90% sure. I was nervous, but I was tired of the weird things happening and wanted them to stop, so the next day I went over there. I knocked on his door and he answered it looking sort of confused. The guy had sort of curly hair and glasses, and he asked what I wanted. I told the man that I was his next-door neighbor and pointed to my room. The guy said, "Yeah, I know." I told him how strange things were happening to me, and some of the noises that I was hearing sounded like they were coming from his room. I then mentioned how I had seen him look like he was about to put something in my front step. The man completely denied everything. I asked him if someone else lived with him who was maybe responsible. The man told me that he lived in his apartment by himself and had lived there for several years and didn't appreciate me accusing him of this stuff. He then suggested maybe I was just going crazy and then slammed the door in my face. I was pretty disappointed on how it went talking to him, and I went back to my apartment feeling pretty embarrassed. I realized, though, that it wasn't a very good plan that I had to confront the guy. After that, the strange things kept continuing. I got a few more random pieces of paper at my front step, some with red X's on them, others with curse words probably directed at me. Then one night, I got a knock on my door very late at night, and of course nobody was there. Then, a few minutes later, I heard a distinct knocking coming from the other side of my wall that was 100% coming from the man's apartment. I was so angry that I stormed over and started pounding on his door. I kept knocking on the door and yelled for him to open up, but the man wouldn't answer. A few minutes later, the door across the hall opened, and I saw a woman who was wearing pajamas come out. She looked like she had just woken up, and she asked me what I was doing. I explained the situation to her, and she told me that the guy who lives there's name was Mike. He had left the day before and was out of town for a week. When I heard this, I didn't know what to do. I felt bad for waking the woman up. I told her sorry, then went back to my apartment and went to bed. I decided after that to just move out. I stayed there for a few more weeks. The strange things happened up until about a week before I moved, and it stopped. I'm glad I don't live there anymore because it was very weird. I used to work as a delivery driver for Domino's a couple of years ago. I had the job for 3 months total, and at first, I didn't mind it. I should mention that I'm a female and was about 20 at the time. One night, I delivered a pizza to this one guy's house. He had brown hair and was sort of short. I remember that he was really friendly to me and actually invited me inside. Of course, I said no and accepted his tip and then left. About a week later, I delivered to his house again. He was once again super friendly and basically started a conversation with me that lasted a few minutes. The guy came across as a little bit creepy, to be honest. Overall, it didn't bother me too much though. However, only a few days later, I once again delivered to him. I guessed that he just loved to order pizza and also happened to be creepy. But the next night, I was told that he ordered a pizza and requested me to be the delivery driver. I didn't really want to deliver to him, but I did. This time, he invited me inside again, and when I said no, he asked a second time. It seemed as though he was not getting the hint, and he was being really weird. After that, I left. The next night that I worked, the same thing happened. He ordered a pizza and asked that I delivered it. I said that I really didn't want to deliver there anymore, and we had somebody else go. The guy tried again the next time I worked as well. I was told by my boss that this guy had actually called a couple of times on nights that I wasn't working, asking if I was in, and when told that I wasn't, he hung up. Now, I knew this guy just didn't happen to love pizza. He seemed to want me to keep going to his house. Not long after this, the guy followed me on Instagram. I don't know how he found me, but he did. I guess it probably isn't all that difficult. He sent me a direct message saying hi and asking why I wouldn't deliver pizzas to his house anymore. I didn't need to respond to him, and I just blocked his account. This didn't stop him though. He actually texted me on my cell phone. At first, I didn't know it was him, but soon enough, I could tell. He started out saying, "Hi, how are you?" I asked who it was, and he said, "You know." I really didn't. He then asked me to come over to his house and go inside this time instead of running back to the pizza place. I knew it was him then, and I texted him that if he didn't leave me alone, I would go to the police immediately. He then started to apologize and asked me not to go to the police. I just blocked the number at that point. I fully expected him to try something else, and I would go to the police if he did, but I actually didn't hear from the man after that. Thankfully, I haven't since. Last year, I got an Airbnb in the woods. It was a cabin, and I was considering getting a cabin myself. I went for a weekend trip and rented the place for 2 nights. It was very far north from where I lived, but I knew the area pretty well. There were some lakes very close by, and it was mainly just cabins and wildlife in the general area. The cabins in the area were very far apart from each other. It was very secluded and a great place to get away from everything. The cabin that I stayed in did have electricity and running water, and was a decent size for a cabin. There was a living room, kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom. If I ended up owning a cabin, I would have wanted it to be very similar. The very first night, I was cooking something in the kitchen and heard a noise from the other room. There was somebody seemingly knocking on the back door. It was pretty strange to say the least. I stopped what I was doing and walked over to check it out. When I got there, though, nobody was there. I was sure that I had heard somebody knocking, but I started to question myself. Perhaps I hadn't heard somebody knocking. It wasn't really that loud, and there had been some noise from me cooking. Maybe something else behind the cabin made some noise. The land around there was mostly just woods. There were really no reason for anybody else to be over here anyways. It could have possibly been an animal. I figured it was nothing and went back to cooking, and everything went well for the next hour or so. But that's when I heard it again. By now, I was in the living room, so all I had to do was look over. The back door where it was coming from was only like 15 feet away from me, but when I looked, I couldn't really see anything because of how dark it was outside. I got up and then walked over to the door. That's when I was sure that for a second, I saw somebody running away. I couldn't tell who they were or anything. I couldn't even tell if it was a man or a woman, just that somebody was running off. I opened up the door slightly and heard whoever it was now running through the woods, but I couldn't see them at all. The trees and leaves rustled as the person got deeper in. Somebody was messing with me or something. I had no clue who would do this or why, though. This was an Airbnb in basically the middle of the woods, far away from anyone else. I was pretty creeped out now. I made sure that the doors were locked and stuff. After a while of nothing happening that night, though, I went to bed. I got to sleep just fine, but woke up sometime in the night. What woke me up was the sound of somebody screaming. They weren't saying anything, but just screaming. It sounded like once again they were behind the cabin. It was extremely loud, and I got up to walk closer to it. When I got to the back door, it sounded like the person was less than 10 feet away. I carefully looked outside. When I was looking out the window, at first I saw nothing at all. The noise was coming from to the right, but I couldn't see them from where I was. As I was looking out still, just a few seconds later, the person suddenly came right into my sight. They walked right up to the back door. It was an insane-looking man. His eyes were really wide as he came right up to the door and then knocked on it. Then he kept screaming. I jumped back and got my phone and called for the police. Then I went into the bedroom and tried to ignore it. The police would take a while to get there because of where we were. The man stopped and seemed to go back into the woods about 10 minutes later, and then the police got there about another 10 minutes after that. By then, the man was gone, and I could just tell the police what had happened. They looked around a little bit, but I'm not sure where the guy went. I ended up leaving the next morning, but luckily, the guy didn't come back in the time that I was there.
Roughly 10 years ago, when I was in high school, I had just gotten my first job and went to the bank with my mother to open up a bank account. We went one day after school and met with someone who worked at the bank. We sat at a table with them, and they helped us open the account and explain stuff to us. I didn't understand a whole lot, but I knew that my mom was also going to have access to my account, so she was asking them a lot of questions and things like that. When we were all talking about this, I looked around the bank and noticed a man walk inside and then go to the side wall and just kind of stand there. I was trying to pay attention to my mom and the bank worker, but their conversation was really boring for me as I was a 15-year-old kid. For some reason, I don't know why, my eyes kept wandering all over the bank, and I kept looking at the man who was just standing there. I made eye contact with him a few times. I didn't really know what he was doing, but I also didn't really care. Finally, after probably 30 minutes, my account was opened and my mother and I said goodbye to the woman who had helped us. Then we left. Later that night, back at home, as I was finishing my homework in the living room, my parents were watching a show on TV and I was sort of half paying attention to it. When the show ended, the local news came on. couple of minutes into it, they said that a bank had been robbed earlier. When we saw it, it was the same bank that my mother and I had been to. I heard my mother say, "Wow." Then I heard that the man had robbed the bank of over $15,000 and had gotten away. They showed his picture from the security camera footage of the bank, and I could see that it was the same guy I saw in the bank. He had robbed the bank only minutes after my mother and I had left. I talked with my parents for a while about it, and the next day we heard that the man was actually caught. It's really scary to think how we just narrowly avoided him.
This story happened 5 years ago. I have my own house and live sort of out there. I don't get many people at my front door. So one day as I was having some morning coffee, I heard the sound of my doorbell ring. I was slightly surprised by this, so I walked over and looked out the window. It looked to be one of those door-to-door salesmen or something like that. The guy wore a jacket and had a sort of clipboard with a pen in his hand. As I looked out the window, he noticed me and gave a friendly wave. I decided to go to the door and answer it, and just tell him that whatever he was selling, I was not interested in. I opened the door and greeted him. He said hi and complimented me on my house. I said thanks, but anything he was offering, I really wasn't interested in. Then I saw 3 men appear out of the side of the house that I couldn't see from my angle. They all started running towards me, and I tried to slam the door shut, but the salesman guy stuck himself in the way, and before I knew it, there were 4 guys in my house with me. One of them grabbed me by the arms, and another one told me that they needed some things, and I was going to wait in my room until they got it. They then stated that if I had enough valuables for them, they wouldn't hurt me. Now, I had a few valuable things in my house, but I didn't know what they wanted, and the thought of them hurting me made me want to get away. One of the men began to lead me down the hallway, and as he did, he gripped onto my right arm. The other men started to walk around the house in all different directions. I had an idea, and I knew it was a big risk, but I guess I just had a rush of adrenaline in the moment. As soon as we were passing by the bathroom in the hallway, I tugged away as fast as I could and broke free from the man's grip. I then got into the bathroom and slammed the door shut and locked it as quick as I could. The man was really close to getting in, but I think he was a little caught off guard by my actions. I knew he was going to try to break the door down, and I heard him try as soon as he realized the door was locked. The guy was pretty big, so I didn't doubt that he would be able to knock the door down before long. So I quickly opened up the bathroom window as fast as I could. It took me a little while, probably about 30 seconds, but once I did, I was able to just barely squeeze out the window and get outside. Once I was outside, I began to run as fast as I could towards the neighbor's house. It took me a while to get there, and I'm pretty sure one of the men went out of the house to chase me, because I heard running in the backyard, but I sure didn't stop to look. I finally got to the front door of one of my neighbors and knocked on it as loud as I could and fast. I looked around but didn't see anybody coming after me at the moment. They opened the door after a little while, and I told them what was going on. My neighbor Margaret let me stay inside her house, and I called the police. They arrived a short time later, but by then, all the men were gone. When I got back to my house, it was a huge mess. They hadn't really stolen anything, but more so vandalized the place, breaking lots of things and just overall causing a huge mess. I had to use my insurance, but at the end of the day, I was just happy to be all right. This is something that happened a few years ago when I went to Safeway. It was nighttime. I don't remember exactly what time, but a little bit later. I stopped there just to get a few things. After parking my car, I went to walk inside the store. There was a man standing a few feet away from the entrance door. He was wearing a winter jacket and a winter hat, and when I passed by him, he asked me if I had a cigarette. I told him no, I did not, and I kept walking. At the time, I didn't really think much of it. So after I entered the store, things were very quiet inside. Not that many other people were there, and I went directly to what I needed. I didn't even have to get a cart or a basket. I only spent about 5 minutes shopping, and then headed back to the front. There, I paid for my items, and then went to leave. I walked to the exit, and then, as I was about to leave, I saw the man again. I was in the little area that grocery stores have before you exit, There's a few vending machines and things like that. The man was standing around in that area, and when I started to pass him by, he asked me once more if I had a cigarette. I guess he had forgot that I already talked to him just 5 minutes before and had told him no. Once again, I said no to the man, and he then asked me if he could have $5. I said sorry but no, and I kept walking. But as soon as I made it out of the store, the man left right after I did. I figured that he was just walking back around to the spot that he had been at before, but the farther that I walked through the parking lot, I could still hear him a ways back. I soon got all the way out to my car, and the guy was about 30 feet behind me. I stood outside of my vehicle and turned around to face the man. There he stopped and just stood there, facing me. There were no other cars nearby that he might be going to. Clearly, he had been following me out for some reason. I said, "Can I help you?" The man said, "Yes, give me all your money." I chuckled, not thinking that he was serious, but he didn't laugh at all. I asked him if he was serious, and he nodded his head without smiling or anything. I started to feel very nervous at that point. I unlocked my car and tried to get inside of it as fast as I possibly could. As soon as I moved, the guy started sprinting towards me. I locked my doors and started my engine. By that time, the man reached me. He first tried opening my door and then got one whack at my window. By then, I was able to start driving away. I left the parking lot as quickly as I possibly could, leaving the man standing there. When I made it out, I called the police and told them what happened. I felt lucky that I was able to make it away from the guy. After that experience, I was nervous to go shopping by myself for a while. I still rarely go at night. When I do, I always try to park in a well-lit area or as close to the store as I can. I've been living in my neighborhood for a little bit over 2 years now. This is something that happened last year. I live by myself, and since I moved in, I've gotten to know a few of my neighbors. It's a standard neighborhood with many houses, and most of the neighbors are very friendly. I enjoy talking with them when I can. So one time, I got home from work in the late afternoon, and then went to the end of my driveway to get the mail. As I was doing that, I saw my neighbor Darian was outside. He's a very friendly guy, and he waved to me. I wanted to talk to him because I hadn't in a while, so I started walking over. Darian lives across the street from me and probably 3 doors down. We got to talking, and between the two of us, we're quite the talkers. Our conversation lasted for quite a bit longer than I thought it would. We probably ended up talking for almost an hour, to be honest. It was a good time though, and we were standing a few feet into his yard the entire time. Now, a couple of cars had drove by while we were talking, but I didn't even really notice them. Mostly our street was quiet, but occasionally people would drive by here and there. The sun had also set in the time that we had been talking, and it was now dark out. Finally, we said goodbye to each other, and I headed back over to my house, and Darian headed inside. As I was walking to my house, I was almost at the end of my driveway when I noticed that somebody was actually at my front door. This was sort of weird. It was a man who was just wearing like a sweatshirt and jeans. He didn't seem like any kind of a salesman. Plus, it was dark out. I thought about just walking up and asking him who he was, but for some reason, I just stood there. I wanted to see if the guy would walk away. The guy looked like maybe he had been knocking at my door. After maybe 30 seconds or so, he left my front step. But he didn't even turn around. He immediately went into my front yard and then around to the side of the house. He then disappeared behind it, almost in my backyard. In fact, that's where it looked like he was going. Now, this was pretty suspicious to me. I walked up and then went inside my house through the front door. I had thought about going around to the back, but decided not to. Once I was inside, I went towards the back of the house to look out the windows that led to the backyard. When I did not see the guy. Everything in the backyard seemed quiet and normal. I'd looked through multiple windows, in fact, and didn't see anything. I figured that the guy just left through someone else's backyard or something. It was a little weird, but it didn't look like he was still here. Then I went around to the living room and turned on the TV. I sat on the couch, but only like a minute later, I suddenly heard the sound of glass breaking. It was coming from the back of my house. I quickly got up and ran out of the room and upstairs to my bedroom. As I was doing this, I just barely heard somebody entering my house. I got into my bedroom and then locked the door behind me. I couldn't believe what was happening. Then, whoever was inside my house, who I was assuming was the guy I had seen at my front step, started walking closer. He made his way into the living room and was getting near the stairs. That's when I yelled as loud as I could that I had a weapon and I was not afraid to use it. I also yelled that I had already called the police. I was just desperate to try to get this guy out of here. Then I actually did call the police. At first, I didn't think that I scared the guy off at all. While he didn't come upstairs, I did hear him downstairs for a while. But soon, things became silent. I stopped hearing him moving around at all. And not long after, I heard sirens. The police got there, and I was finally able to leave my bedroom. A search was done everywhere inside my house, but the man was gone. They also searched all outside, but he wasn't there either. He did mess up my house quite a bit though, and stole several items. I was upset about that, but overall just happy to be okay. The man ended up being located not too long after that, and some of my items were recovered, but I still had to get my window replaced. This remains one of the scariest things to ever happen to me.
I used to work at Toys R Us years ago when I was younger. At the time, I was in high school, and I worked there my senior year through the summer after graduating high school. This story takes place on one night, just like any other. It was a weeknight, and after we closed, I would occasionally stay after to help straighten up the store. It was maybe 30 minutes or so after we had closed, and I only worked for about another 20. I was pretty much just ready to go home. I was reorganizing some of the remote control cars on the shelf, which were a little bit out of order. As I was doing so, I thought I started to hear like a whisper. Now, I was the only person in this particular area of the store, and I knew that. There were only 2 other people working, and they were both at the front end of the store. As I kept working, I heard it again, but louder. It sounded for sure as if somebody was whispering from somewhere. I couldn't quite put my finger on where it was coming from. I called out, "Who's there?" I asked. I heard a whisper of somebody going, "Shh." It really freaked me out. None of my coworkers would do something like that. I knew them pretty well. Plus, even if they were, I couldn't tell where this noise was coming from. It was a pretty big store with lots of aisles and displays, but I knew they had to be close based on the whisper. "Who are you and what are you doing?" I asked in a serious tone. I heard a very quiet laugh, and then someone said, "Over here," in a sort of half whisper. This gave me more of an indication of the direction that it was coming from. I looked over in that direction, but I still didn't see anyone. I kept on looking there. My eyes were drawn to that area, as if I knew that somebody was there someplace. And then, I noticed it. We had one of those small model houses that little kids can play in, and it was on display. I saw through one of the windows somebody was looking back at me. It was a crazy-looking man. When we made eye contact, I heard him whisper for me to come over to him. Instead, I ran in the opposite direction to try and get as far away from him as I could. I sprinted to the front end of the store where my coworkers were. When I got there, they saw how distraught I was and asked me what was going on. When I told them what had happened, they both went to look, but when we went back there, we couldn't find the man. He had left the house, and after calling out to him, and even using the store speakers, we couldn't find him or get him to leave. Eventually, we had to call the police. After they showed up, they found the man hiding in one of the back corners of the store.
During my college years, I worked at a movie theater. It was a theater about 5 miles from my house, and I'd work mostly on nights and weekends. This particular story is from a weeknight that I was working on a closing shift. The theater closed 20 minutes after the last movie of the night started. I remember that it was pretty quiet with it being a weeknight, and there were maybe 15 or so people in the last movie. When it started, there were 4 of us working, and then it went down to 2, me and my coworker George. We turned off some of the lights, but kept the concessions open. The movie was about 10 minutes in, and when it was almost time to close up, I saw a man walk in the front door. To be quite honest, he sort of looked homeless. He had a small backpack and dirty, wrinkly clothes with messy hair. He walked in and sat in one of the chairs in the lobby area. I started to clean up a little bit behind the concessions counter where I was working, and George was a little ways over at the ticket counter. 10 minutes later, it was time to lock up. The guy was still sitting there in the lobby as I locked the front door to the theater. I thought about telling him to leave, but he really didn't have to leave until the movie ended. After locking the doors, I returned to the counter and then saw somebody approaching from the hallway of the auditoriums. There was a customer looking to buy some popcorn, and I helped him. When I was done, I noticed that the man in the lobby was gone. I hadn't seen him leave or anything because I was busy, and I stayed behind the counter for a little while longer in case anybody else wanted to get some food. After several minutes of nothing, I decided to get a start on cleaning, and I went to the hallway to start. I left the counter and walked over to the hallway where the auditoriums were. It was pretty long and all carpeted. I was going to change out the garbages, not near where the movie was going on, but as soon as I got out into the hallway, I saw the same guy who had been sitting in the lobby. He was at the far end of the hallway and was going near the movie that was in progress. I knew he didn't have a ticket, and I walked over to the man to tell him that he couldn't be back here. I asked him what he was doing, but he didn't answer me. The guy completely ignored me and walked right past me and down the hallway to the other theaters. He kept walking and then went inside the men's bathroom. I wasn't quite sure what to do. I ended up changing the garbages that I had planned to, but I also kept my eye on the bathrooms if the man left. He stayed in there the entire time that I was over there, and I went back to the front lobby to tell George about the guy. George was a little bit concerned, but suggested that we wait and hope the guy leaves. I went back down to check the hallways periodically and never saw the man. Eventually, the last movie ended. It was almost midnight by now. The people that were at the movies all left within 10 minutes of the movie ending. At that point, it was just us in the theater and the guy in the bathroom. I decided to go and approach the bathroom and shout inside asking if anybody was in there and announcing that the theater was closing. When I did, nobody answered me. I thought maybe the man actually had left, and I started to feel a little bit better. I began to walk in, but right after I took my first step, I heard the man yell. He shouted at me in an extremely loud and aggressive tone that if I came in there, I was dead. I stopped and left without going inside. George came over and yelled in, asking why the man was acting that way, but the guy wouldn't answer him. We eventually told the guy that if he wouldn't leave, we were going to call the police. The guy didn't respond to that either, so that's exactly what we did. The police came within 10 minutes, and George and I finished our work and were ready to go home. They had to go in the bathroom to get the guy to leave. However, we were told that when the police entered the bathroom, the guy had broken off a part of one of the soap dispensers and was trying to use it as a weapon. I'm really glad I didn't go inside that bathroom, because I almost did. I used to work as a forest ranger in the Northwest a couple of years ago. I worked in an area with tons and tons of dense woods and several campsites and parks nearby as well. One night, probably around midnight, I was driving my truck down one of the quiet roads surrounded by woods when I noticed something on the road up ahead. As I got closer, I saw it was a man standing barely on the road and waving his arms over his head. I slowed down my vehicle, and as I approached the man, I saw him start pointing down into the woods. You really couldn't see more than a foot or so in the woods because of how dense it was this time of year, and with it being nighttime. As soon as I pulled over to the side of the road, I didn't even have time to get out of my truck before the man took off running into the woods. I was a little taken back by this, and I figured the man was in some kind of trouble. I got out my flashlight and looked to where the man had entered the woods. It wasn't a real path, but the brush and trees had been moved back in a way that it made a path through all the trees going deeper into the woods. I could see the man moving through the woods, and I called out to him if he needed help. The man yelled back to me that I had to come quick, and then he said something that sounded like his friend needed help, although I didn't really hear him very well. I followed quickly with tree branches and brush hitting me in the face and body as I did. I walked back for probably a minute or two before I completely lost sight of the man. He seemed to go off into a clearing of some sort. When I arrived at the clearing, I saw there was about 20 feet of open space. The grass in the area had been flattened a little. I shined my flashlight around this otherwise completely dark woods, expecting to see the man. However, after shining the light in all directions, I didn't see him. I scanned all over in the thick woods. I didn't see the man at all, so I stopped and listened. There was just silence. Then I started hearing noise in the woods behind me to where the path I came from was. I turned around and barely saw what appeared to be someone dodge the beam of my light and go deeper into the woods. I then heard more movements on the complete other side of the woods and flashed my light to see at least 2 people dart in different directions deeper into the woods. I announced myself as a forest ranger in a loud voice and told them whoever was there to come out. Instead, I I just heard movements going farther away in all different directions. I got a bad feeling about the situation and figured it would be best for me to go back to my truck and get the local police department involved. I walked rather quickly back through the path and finally got back to my truck, which was still parked on the side of the road. I got inside and reported the situation. Then I waited until several units arrived. When they got there, we talked briefly. I drove down the road to inspect the rest of the area. About a mile or so down the road, I came across a car that was parked on the side, but it was more like off the road and was kind of sticking out of the woods. I went around and saw that there was nobody in the car, and it seemed to be abandoned. I called out asking if anybody was nearby, but I got no response. The plates of the car ended up being run, and it turned out to be a stolen vehicle. Nobody really turned up anything that night, and after that, the investigation fell out of my hands.
Last year, I was asked to watch my sister's kids while she went out of town for a few days. I'm a female and I'm in college, so I was home for the summer, and obviously I said yes. My sister is 7 years older than I am and has twin boys who are now 5, but were 4 years old at the time. It was just going to be 3 or 4 days, but I was still really nervous to watch them all by myself because I figured not 1, but 2 4-year-olds would be really challenging. At first, it was, but I spent some time with them before my sister left, taking care of them a little bit so I could get used to it. Obviously, I'd seen them many times before, but I never had to actually take care of them. When my sister left, I did have to call her a couple of times with small questions, but for the most part, everything was going good. My sister and her husband have a 2-story house, with all of the bedrooms being upstairs, and I would be staying in one of them. The twins share a bedroom right next door to the master bedroom. Then there was a guest bedroom that I would be in. Most nights, I would try to have the twins in bed by like 8 or 9 p.m. On the second night, the twins seemed to have a lot of energy. They played with their toys and ran around the living room until it was time for bed. It took a little bit of effort, but I was finally able to get them both upstairs and in bed by about 9 o'clock. I went downstairs after that because I wasn't tired at all. I was hanging out in the living room when about an hour later, I started to hear noises coming from upstairs. I figured one of the twins, or both of them, were awake and playing around in their bedroom. I went upstairs to tell them that they needed to go back to bed. When I got upstairs, though, I went into the twins' bedroom to see them both fast asleep in their beds. This was confusing me. Were they playing a trick on me? I shut the door and started walking back downstairs, but then I heard more noises again. I stopped. The noises weren't coming from the twins' bedroom, though. They were coming from the master bedroom. Who on earth could possibly be in there? I had a terrible feeling about it and didn't even think about opening the door. Instead, I ran back into the twins' bedroom and shut the door. Thank goodness they had a lock on their bedroom door. I saw that the twins were still asleep, and I stayed by the bedroom door and listened. Things were silent for a minute, and then I heard noises again coming from the master bedroom. Then I heard footsteps leaving the bedroom and getting closer. They walked down the hall to seemingly go downstairs. I hoped this meant whoever was in the house was leaving, and I decided to call the police. I felt comfortable actually speaking now that the person was downstairs, and I dialed 911 and told them what was going on. They said an officer would be out there shortly. I hoped and was sort of expecting whoever was in the house to leave, and I listened close to hear the sound of the front door opening or closing. As I waited, though, I didn't hear it. Instead, I heard footsteps coming back up the stairs again. My heart started to beat faster and faster. The footsteps were slowly getting closer. Then, they arrived just outside the bedroom door that I was in. I held my breath and closed my eyes. Whoever was on the other side of the door then tried opening it. The doorknob turned, but stopped. Then I heard footsteps walking back into the master bedroom that was next door again. I was still standing there, trying not to make any kind of sounds at all. Whoever was there stayed in the master bedroom for maybe 30 seconds, if I had to guess. Then they came back out into the hallway and stood right outside the bedroom that I was in. I felt like they knew I was in there. Still, I tried my best to be quiet and not make a sound. Then I heard the sound of sirens. They were coming from down the street and were very quickly getting louder and louder. I heard the footsteps now moving away and go back downstairs. The police were there and in the house within a minute. To my surprise, they caught the intruder, which happened to be a man that lived nearby, I guess. It ended up being a long night, but everything turned out fine. I was just happy that the twins and I were okay. This happened back when I was in high school. At the time, I think I was like 15, and most of my free time away from school was me either playing video games or hanging out with my friends. I had a pretty good number of friends at school, and would hang out with them all pretty frequently. I remember that one day, I was with my friends Jake, Sam, and Jordan. We all lived in the same city and could walk to each other's houses. We had been at Sam's house, who lived the farthest away from me, and also within walking distance of our houses there was a shopping center with stores and restaurants. It was summer, so we all had a lot of free time. I don't remember exactly why, but I do remember at nighttime one day, we went to one of the stores in the area and a few of us got some snacks and things like that. When we left, we had to walk across basically the entire shopping area to get back to the neighborhood that Sam's house was in. We crossed on one of the streets at the crosswalk, and then, instead of going back the way we came, Sam suggested that we take a shortcut through the parking lot of the old Toys R Us. This Toys R Us was closed and abandoned. It had closed the previous summer. The building was on the side of the shopping center, and going through its large parking lot led to a small woods that then went to Sam's neighborhood. It was a good idea, even though we had to cut through the woods, as well as the very dimly lit parking lot. We walked through the parking lot, and Jordan got curious and began to peek inside the doors of the old Toys R Us. I followed him, and we both looked inside. He really couldn't see much, but from what I did see, it looked mostly empty and dark. However, there appeared to be a small light coming from somewhere inside, towards the back, mostly out of sight. It was as if one of the lights was on. It was interesting and sort of creepy to see the old abandoned Toys R Us like that. I had memories of going there when I was younger, and I'm sure all my friends did as well. After looking around for a few seconds, we backed off and decided to continue heading home. We moved past the building to the side of it, where there was a small side parking lot and then the woods. As we approached the entrance of the woods, we all froze when we heard a noise. It sounded like an animal, or maybe a person, was in the woods about 50 feet down. Then, we saw the Toys R Us giraffe, or a person dressed in the old Toys R Us giraffe costume. It was an extremely creepy sight to see coming out of the woods at that time of night. He looked directly at us and just stood there. I'm pretty sure none of us were able to move from the shock of the situation that we were in. Then, the giraffe started to slowly move forward, all while looking at us the entire time. Before we knew it, the walk turned into a really strange-looking run. The giraffe was now chasing us. All of us bolted for the woods and ran for our lives. We didn't stop until we had made it out the other side and into the quiet streets of Sam's neighborhood. Once we had made it there, we all scrambled to find each other, and then continued at a fast pace all the way to Sam's house, which was another 3 blocks away or so. After getting back, we told Sam's parents what we had witnessed, but they didn't seem too concerned about it, and looking back, if I was them, I probably wouldn't have been either. But years later, it's still one of the more creepy memories that I have. Why was there someone dressed as a Toys R Us mascot outside when they had been closed for almost a year? Maybe it was some guy trying to scare people, but I'll never forget it. Last month, I quit my job of working as a security guard for a hotel. I've gotten another job that I like much better since. The security guard position was overall not for me, but I'm happy that I gave it a try. All in all, I worked for a total of 4.5 months, and all of it was at a pretty nice hotel in downtown of the city I live in. The area of the city that the hotel is in borders a not-so-nice area and a nicer area. I mainly sat inside the front lobby of the hotel and helped out with any concerns they had, and also made sure everything was in order. One night, a little over a month ago, I was inside the hotel near the front door. The lobby area is pretty big, and there really wasn't anybody else around anymore at this time. I had a walkie on my belt, which I could use to communicate with hotel staff or any other security that was working on the premises. I heard somebody say my name on the walkie, and I picked it up off my side and responded for them to go ahead. I was told to switch to channel 4 on the walkie, and when I did, I was told that there was a situation to be investigated at the west side of the building. When I heard this, I didn't have a very good feeling about it. The west side of the building was a dark alley between the side of the hotel and the building next to us. It really wasn't used for much, and I really didn't know what to expect going out there. I left the front entrance of the hotel and walked around to the side where the alley was. It was crazy how much darker and quieter it was from the street when you got out there. I walked on the side of it, but I wasn't noticing anything. I went past some of the dumpsters that were near the side doors and farther down. Nothing was over there. I walked all around to the back side of the building where there was another alley area. Then I took a few more steps back.
I took out my walkie and said that I didn't see anything at all. There was a response of someone saying to come around to the back. I began walking over to the back, but as I did, I thought about how weird this was. I didn't even know or recognize the voice who was talking to me. It seemed suspicious. I got to the end of the building and looked around to the back. When I was there, I looked around again. I still didn't see anything except for a car that was parked alongside the alley a little ways down. Its lights were off, but then I noticed somebody was inside of it. When I was looking at the car, all of a sudden it started pulling forward closer to me. I didn't even know that it was on. I took out my radio and asked who had been calling me over here. On the other end, I heard laughing, and a creepy laugh. Then the car started driving closer to me. As it was getting closer, I noticed one of the back doors starting to open. I just turned and started running all the way back to the other side of the building. The car turned too and followed me down the alley. I ran faster all the way to the front and then back inside the hotel. I didn't look back, but it felt like I barely made it out front before the car had reached me. The car then sped off into another direction. When I got back inside the hotel, I asked other staff members if they knew who had been calling me on the walkie, but nobody did. This was truly a scary experience for me, and I quit not too long after.
I used to work at a bank several years ago. I was a bank teller and would work behind the counter and help customers. The bank was old and I would say average sized. It was near a shopping center and not right in the city or anything like that. I held this job for roughly a year before moving on. Overall, it was kind of boring, but one day was anything but boring. It was a pretty typical weekday, and like most days, we weren't too busy. It was about 10 a.m., and I was the only one behind the counter when a man walked in. There were no other customers inside at the moment, so I noticed right away. The man had very short dark hair and seemed to be on the shorter side. He walked directly up to the counter. He was wearing a gray hoodie, and as he got up to the counter, he put his hand into his pocket. I could see there was something inside of it, and the man pointed to it and told me that he had a gun and this was a robbery. I was shocked at first. I had always heard stories of bank robberies, but even working as a bank teller, I never really worried about it or thought that it would happen to me. The man asked me for $10,000 in cash. I turned around to get the money. I turned back around to ask the man what kind of bills he wanted in, but when I looked, I didn't see him. I walked back to the end of the counter, and he was nowhere to be seen. I was shaking from the confrontation, and my heart was pounding. I was now extremely confused. I walked back behind the counter and found Tom, who was my boss. I told him what had happened. He came out from his office and looked around the whole bank. The man was not there at all. The bank got temporarily closed down, and the police were called to search. They were all around the property for a while, but they didn't find the man. I started to feel dumb about it, but I knew it wasn't my imagination. We went to check the security camera footage after that, and found that in the exact time where the man walked in, it cut out for some reason. It was extremely confusing to us all. I took a few days off after that. I didn't work there much longer, and I still wonder about it to this day what happened.
I used to work at a smaller grocery store. I worked there for several years, from the time I was a senior in high school all the way through college. The entire time I was there, I was just part-time. I got to know just about all the other employees though. We only had probably 10 to 15 total employees at once, because the store really wasn't that big. It had just 3 check lanes, and it would never get all that busy. The store was located on the edge between a residential area and a more commercial area. I liked working there because it was calm compared to the busier and more popular grocery stores. There were also a lot of regular customers, and I would get to know some of them. I was mostly just a cashier when I worked there. There was one terrifying experience that happened that I will never forget though. I was working from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m., which was also the time that we closed. It was a quiet night. Things were normal for the most part until sometime after 8 o'clock. By that point, it was just myself and one other coworker, a girl named Amanda. She was working in the back room of the store at the time, organizing things. Sometime after 8:30, a man entered the store. At that point, no other customers were inside. Soon, he went out of my sight. Some time went by, and I didn't see or hear the man at all. Nobody else came in either. It wasn't unusual, but we were closing soon, so I was kind of hoping that the guy would hurry up. I announced that we would be closing in 15 minutes at 8:45. Still saw no sign of him. When 9 o'clock hit, he was still nowhere to be seen. I made the announcement that we were closed with no luck. From where I was, I really couldn't see a lot of the store, just the immediate area and part of the nearby aisles. After a few minutes, I decided that I should go find the guy and let him know that he had to stop shopping now. I also wondered where Amanda was. Usually when we closed, she would come out of the back room and we would leave together. She must have been finishing up. So I got up from my check lane and started to walk through the aisles. I hadn't seen a sign of the guy since he entered the store, really. I hadn't heard anything either. It didn't take me very long to look through most of the aisles because the store wasn't all that big. But when I had made it towards the back, I still hadn't seen the guy at all. I thought maybe he left without me noticing. I just know that I would have noticed though. The only entrance/exit to the store was to my right from the check lanes, and I would have heard the doors opening. I knew he was still in here. Wherever he was though, I couldn't tell. I decided to go to the back room of the store to get Amanda. Then we could both look. The back room of the store was pretty typical, and it ran along the entire back side of the store. We kept extra products there, and that's also where we would get all of our deliveries. I walked closer to the door, and when I was maybe 10 feet away from it, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I stopped and took my phone out. I saw that I had a text from Amanda. It said, "Get out of the store." I was confused when I read this, but before I could respond, I got another text. This one was also from Amanda and said, "A man came into the back room and tried to attack me. I left, but he's still inside." I looked at the door to the back room, just 10 feet away. Then I turned around and sprinted for the front of the store. I went out the exit, got outside, and ran for my car. When I made it inside, I called Amanda. She told me that she had called the police already and they were on the way. I waited inside my car for about 5 minutes until they showed up. Then I watched them enter the store. About 10 minutes later, they left with the man. He had still been in there and was hiding in the back room. I had never seen him before that day, and I didn't know why he came to our store or what exactly his intentions were. But after he went in the back room, I guess Amanda told him that he wasn't supposed to be back there. He then approached her without saying a word and grabbed her. She struggled and was able to get away from him. He chased her to one of the doors leading outside, and when she left, he remained in the back room. If I had gone back there, I don't know what would have happened. I'm really glad that Amanda texted me when she did.
A few years ago, the summer after I graduated from high school, me and a few friends all met up at a carnival at a nearby city. It was a pretty popular event. It happened every year with all the normal games and rides you would expect. We got there and played some games and got food. We really did all the normal carnival stuff. We stayed there until night and then started to head back. We went back towards the entrance of the carnival and all said bye to each other. Then we went our separate ways. All the four of us had parked in different places, so after saying bye, I walked back into the carnival to the side where I had parked my car, which was a few blocks away. But as I was walking, I saw a man approach me. He was skinny and had a sort of scraggly beard. He appeared to be sort of young. He asked me if I was leaving and if I could give him a ride. This guy was looking pretty sketchy, and I really didn't want to give a ride to someone I didn't know. So I told the man that I didn't have a car. Of course, that wasn't true, but I just wanted him to leave me alone. The man looked disappointed and nodded his head and walked away. Then I walked to my car, which took me about 15 minutes to get there. I unlocked the doors as I got close to it, but at that same time, I heard rapid footsteps on the street coming out of nowhere. I looked and I saw the man. I had no idea he had been following me, and at this time on the street I was parked on, there was no one else around at all. The man said to me, "Oh, you don't have a car, huh?" in a pretty angry voice. I didn't say anything. I was pretty scared, and I couldn't believe what was happening. I then tried to get in my car quickly, but the man ran at me.
He blocked the door to my car, and he demanded the keys. He claimed he could hurt me, so I just tossed the keys at him and ran away. He took the keys and drove off in my car. After he was gone, I called the police and then called one of my friends who drove over and waited until the police arrived. I was pretty shaken up, and the police took down all the information I could give them before my friend Alex gave me a ride home. The car ended up being recovered a few days later, and the man was eventually caught as well.
This happened a few years ago. At the time, this was the summer after I graduated from high school. In the neighborhood that I lived in for most of my life, I remember that there was this one Hardee's restaurant about 5 blocks from our house. It was rumored to be going out of business for what seemed like 10 years in a row. It was in a kind of odd location, and it never seemed to be that busy, but yet it was still there and still open. It was the summer, and one day I walked down to the park that was about a 15-minute walk from my house. I went there to go play some basketball, as it's one of my favorite hobbies. I went to that park all the time, and I don't remember exactly what time I got there, but I pretty much stayed until almost sunset. Then I began to walk home down the sidewalk. It was a Thursday, so that was the night that my parents went to their bowling league. That meant that I would be on my own for dinner, and as I walked past the old Hardee's, I decided to go inside and see what they had. I hadn't been inside this Hardee's in probably 10 years. When I got in, it looked quiet and kind of older. There was nobody else inside, but they were open, and I saw somebody behind the counter. I stood there looking at the menu for a moment, and then I ordered. As I was waiting there, somebody else entered the Hardee's. It was a man, and he walked directly to the back of the restaurant and sat in one of the booths in the back. I continued to wait for my order for about 5 minutes or so. When I got it, I walked out to leave and noticed that the guy sitting in the booth got up. I walked back to the sidewalk to continue my way home, now with my Hardee's bag. As I walked down the sidewalk, I heard the sound of somebody now walking a ways back behind me. It was the guy that I had seen inside the Hardee's. He was a long ways back, but the more that I walked, the more that he continued to walk behind me. Soon, it was my street, and I walked down it to our house. When the guy left the sidewalk and went onto our street as well, I got kind of nervous. Who was this guy? When I reached the driveway and walked up, it sounded like the guy was now getting closer, and I looked behind me. He was on the street, and it now looked like he was starting to walk up my neighbor's driveway across the street. I felt much better seeing this, and I went inside. I sat down on the couch and had some Hardee's while watching TV. It was really good. However, I would say 30 minutes later, as I sat on the couch, I happened to glance over to our front window, which overlooked the front yard. The guy was looking directly in. When I saw him, he ducked down. I ran over to the window to close the blinds, and I was suddenly sweating. After that, I ran around covering every window in our house that I could. Then I called my parents. Luckily, they were on their way home and only about 10 minutes away. I stayed on the phone with them until they came back, and when they did, they told me that they didn't see anybody in the front yard. I was relieved to hear this, and my dad and I went out and checked all around the house, and the man was gone. I wonder to this day, though, why he followed me home and what he wanted.
I'm a security guard. I worked at a number of different places over the years. One of the most bizarre and puzzling experiences I've ever had in my job took place a few years ago. At the time, I was a security guard for a business. They were very careful in their security, and the entire property was to be private, and you needed a pass to enter. I would sit at the entrance and operate the gate during the overnight hours. I couldn't let anybody in unless they gave me the proper credentials. There were people working at all hours, but not nearly as many in the middle of the night, so it was usually pretty quiet for me. On one cold and rainy night, I sat inside my little booth watching the security cameras and ready to operate the gate if anybody came in. At just after 2 a.m., I noticed a car pulling down the drive and making its way over to my gate. I sat up in my chair ready to talk to them. I did not recognize the car as anybody who worked there though, and I was not expecting anybody else, so I was a little bit confused. The car was black with really dark tinted windows. When it pulled up to the gate, I opened the window of my booth and leaned out. The car window did not open. I couldn't see inside because of how dark the tint was. I waited, but nothing happened. I reached out and motioned for the driver to roll down their window or to open the door. Whoever was in there didn't do either. I then knocked on the window, but there was still nothing. I was a little confused, but then the lights inside my booth started to dim and my screen started bugging out. All of a sudden, the gates opened. I had no clue how this was happening. I radioed in to let the other guys know what was going on. The car then sped inside. There were a couple of other security guards on the inside that should be able to see it now. After the car was out of my sight, I went back and looked at the security footage. The time the car went through the gate though, things went black. Then it came back when the car was already through. About 5 seconds after this, I heard screeching tires and watched a car coming back towards the gate at full speed. To avoid a collision, I raised the gate and the car sped out. It had to be going at least 70 miles per hour on the way out. After that, I never saw the car again. I have no idea who it was or what they were doing. Maybe they had some device that opened the gate and messed up all the electronics or something. Either way, it was pretty creepy. Several years ago, my job had me relocate for about a year. It's something that I've done a few times for work, and each time the company offers to find me a place or gives me the option to find one on my own. I decided to just let them find me a place this time because I was really busy with work and didn't feel like the hassle of looking for a new house. They ended up giving me a pretty nice place in a city type of neighborhood. I liked the house and had no complaints about it at all. I quickly realized, though, that there seemed to be nobody living in the house next door to me. The lights were always off, and there was no cars in the driveway. The grass in the yard was also very overgrown. It was a bit of an eyesore to look at, but other than that, I really didn't care. I pretty much spent my time at work or just relaxing at home. One night, I got into my bedroom and was about to go to sleep when I glanced out my window. The window sort of lined up with the neighbor's window next door, and I noticed a man looking at me. We made eye contact for a split second, and then the man's head disappeared down into the dark room that he was in. This nearly gave me a heart attack because I was sure that nobody lived there. The man appeared to be somewhat old from what I had seen, but I really didn't get a great look at him. I didn't see anybody after that for about another week. But finally one day I saw an older man walk out of the front door to the side of the house. I watched him from my window as the man seemed to kind of just stare at the side of his house for a while, and then return back inside. I realized that I did in fact have a next door neighbor, but he just seemed to be kind of strange. I didn't see him much, but I occasionally saw him here and there over the next several weeks. He always seemed to be doing sort of strange things. One day I saw him go outside and walk into my yard. He appeared to just stare at my house for a couple of minutes. I almost went out and talked to him, but he kind of creeped me out, so I just watched him from the window. Eventually, he went back inside. The next day, I happened to see another one of my neighbors out getting mail, so I decided to go over and ask him about the man who lived next to me. But I was told that nobody lived in that house. My neighbor across the street told me that the house next door to me had been abandoned for almost 2 years. I got the chills when he said this. I told him what I had seen, and we both decided to call the police. They came and searched the property of the house next door, but didn't find anyone. I lived there for the rest of the year, and then I moved again. I never did see the man again, but sometimes I would think I heard noises coming from next door. This story takes place on a Friday night at the movies. I went with my best friend Emily, and the theater that we went to was packed. It's pretty much what you would expect with it being a weekend, and we were seeing a relatively new movie as well. After we got inside and sat down, we saw the theater had almost all the seats taken up already. By the time the movie started, I think there were only a couple of empty seats, like 2 or 3. A short time into the movie, I got really hungry. We had seats on the end, really close to the exit, so I decided to get up and get something. I asked Emily if she wanted anything, and she asked me to get her a popcorn. I left the theater and walked out to the hallway. When I did, I happened to notice that a guy got up and left at the exact same time as me. I walked out to the concessions and got in line. The guy got in line right behind me. After waiting in line for about a minute or two, I got our food and then headed back for the theater. When I did, the same guy who was behind me walked back as well. This is when I thought it was strange. If the guy was in line, why didn't he get anything? He just abandoned his place in line when I left? I got a worried feeling that he was following me for some reason. I didn't want to turn around and look back at him, even though I had the urge to. The guy was also now following me at an uncomfortably close distance. He wasn't like 1 foot behind me, but probably within 4 or 5 feet. It almost felt like he was getting closer, so I did look over my shoulder, and the guy was just looking at the ground as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Once I got back into the theater with the movie playing, I felt a little bit better. There were lots of other people around, and I got back to my seat and gave Emily her popcorn. Then I realized that the guy who had been following me was sitting directly behind us. It made me more uncomfortable. I wanted to tell Emily about the guy, but didn't want the guy to somehow overhear. I tried to just watch the movie and forget about it. And for the most part, I did, until the movie ended, and when I thought about leaving, I remembered how the guy had followed me. I was worried he was going to do it again, and I told Emily about the guy right after the movie ended. We decided to try to leave in the crowd of people and hope the guy wouldn't be able to follow us. We both got up and saw people filing into a line to get out of the door. Of course, as soon as we got up, the guy behind us did too. We walked over and sort of cut in the line right in front of somebody else so that the guy wasn't able to get directly behind us. He actually tried cutting right in line behind us too, but then stopped, probably realizing that it wouldn't work. When we got outside the door, there was a women's restroom literally right there. We both walked inside of it and waited in for a few moments. By the time we left back out into the crowded hallway, we couldn't see the guy at all. It seemed like, thankfully, we had lost him. We could then leave without having to worry about that weirdo. We walked through the lobby of the theater and out the front door to the parking lot. When we had taken just a few steps outside, though, I saw something. I could see my car that we had taken, and the guy was actually standing right next to it. He was standing behind it, but I could still see him. He was sort of just standing around like he was waiting for us. I immediately got the chills. I grabbed Emily's arm and we stopped. He turned around and walked right back into the theater. How on earth did he know that was my car? We ended up going to the counter and telling an employee about it. One of the managers offered to actually drive up my car to the door and tell the guy to leave if he attempted to follow. We watched the manager go outside, and when he got to my car, the guy actually walked away. The manager didn't even have to say anything to him. When we got my car, we drove it home carefully to make sure that we weren't followed, which we weren't. Looking back at that night, what creeps me out the most is how the guy knew which car was mine. Had he been following me before that? I really hope not. I've been a park ranger for many years, but this story I'm about to tell you happened on just my first year of the job. I was young and relatively new to things. I was working at a large state park that also had a campsite nearby. At the time, I worked mainly nights, and I didn't mind it, but it did get a little bit spooky for me at times. On this one night, I was walking near one of the campsites like I often did at that time. I was headed back towards the park. It took me about 20 minutes to get back to the park. And about halfway through the walk, I was startled by a noise coming from behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw what appeared to be eyes staring back at me. It was too dark to see anything other than that, though. The eyes appeared to be next to a large tree. I knew it was some kind of animal, so I wasn't that concerned at all. But then I saw the eyes move from next to one tree to another tree that was closer to me. But the way it moved, it was just as if it sort of glided over. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. At that point, I reached for my flashlight without taking my eyes off of what I was seeing. I shined it to the area, and when I did, whatever was there completely disappeared. I saw nothing at all, and I didn't see any leaves or trees move as if something was running away. I suddenly felt pretty spooked. I asked if anyone was there, but I heard nothing. I shook my head and continued to walk back to the park, but at a faster speed. I told myself I was a park ranger and I shouldn't be scared, even though I was new to the job. Another minute later or so, I heard the noises again, this time in the woods beside me. I quickly looked over again, just in time to see a giant log flying directly towards me. The log looked to be huge. I scrambled to get out of the way and fell over trying to avoid it. It hit part of my arm as I fell to the ground, but luckily most of it missed me. It hurt pretty bad because of the size of the log. It had to be a good 5 feet long. I got up and ran to the nearest park building, where I called in to another ranger. We went back and examined the area, but found nothing suspicious. I have no idea what happened that night. I can't imagine anybody who could have the strength or the size to throw that log at me. This story happened years ago when I was in college. I was planning on buying a used car and had saved up some money. I went to the bank to withdraw $7,000 in cash to potentially make a purchase of a car I had been looking at. There was a car at a nearby used car dealership, and I was really interested. I got to the bank on my way home from work and made it just before they closed. They were really quiet, most likely because of the time, and I was able to get the money with a couple of minutes to spare. As soon as I turned around to leave the bank, I saw a guy sitting down looking at me. He was in a chair kind of near the entrance. I left the bank, and after I did, I noticed that the man left as well. I began walking to my car, and I heard the man start to walk towards me. I looked behind me, but he had now changed directions and was walking to his car. I got inside mine and drove home. I lived pretty close to the bank, so I didn't even notice until I had turned onto the quiet road just before my street that the truck the man had gotten in was behind me. I noticed it even more when it turned onto my quiet road after me. Then, when I got to the driveway of my parents' house, I saw the truck turn in with me. Now I was really confused. What could this guy possibly want with me? I stayed in my car and waited to see if the guy would turn around or something like that. Instead, he drove up and parked extremely close to my back bumper and then just stayed there. After about 30 seconds or so, I watched the man get out of his car and start to approach mine. He walked quickly and got right up to my front driver's window. He then signaled for me to roll my window down. I started to roll it down, but as I did, the man tried to open my door. He then reached inside my window as it got lowered enough and got a hold of my shoulder, then started to find where the door unlocked. I didn't know what else to do, so I put the car into drive and drove forward a few feet before backing up and turning the car around. I basically dragged the man with me as I did, and we struggled for a bit, but he finally let go as I sped up, and I ended up driving away down the street. I quickly called my parents, who were at home at the time, and told them. Then I called the police. The man ran back to his truck and got inside of it. I drove as fast as I could out of the street and in the neighborhood surrounding us so he couldn't find me. When I was told that the police had arrived at our house, I drove back home. By that time, the man and his truck were long gone, and there was nothing really left behind. Unfortunately, I didn't get his license plate, but I was able to give the police a pretty decent description of the guy and his car. Thankfully, I was fine, and the man didn't come back. I think when the man saw me walk out of the bank with all that cash, he wanted to try to rob me. Thankfully, he wasn't able to. In September of 2022, I got my first job as a bagger at a public supermarket. The first 2 months were a breeze. Nearing the end of October, I started to notice this older white Honda Accord that would sit past closing and leave right after I did. One night, in the middle of November, I had a late break due to low staff. Since this was near winter, it got dark pretty early. At this point, it was around 7:15 p.m. We do have a break room, but I prefer to sit in my car for privacy. I had just gotten dinner and had started walking out of the store to my car in the far corner of the parking lot. As I was getting into my car, the same white Honda that I mentioned earlier pulled into the parking spot directly beside me, practically in my parking space. I don't know why, but I had a gut feeling something was going to go wrong, so I locked my doors. Right as I did so, a tall, skinny man appeared at my passenger side window, cupping his hands to look inside my window. I suddenly got this huge pit in my stomach that was telling me to run, but I just froze. I didn't know what to do. I quickly and firmly told the man to leave me alone or I would call the police. He just stood there, saying that he wanted to eat dinner with me. In shock, I looked around for any older man in the parking lot to help me, as I was a vulnerable 16-year-old girl. Nobody, not even a soul, was in sight. The parking lot was a ghost town. After about a lifetime, it felt like, the man started yanking at my door's handle and banging on my windows and failing miserably. He gave up after about 30 seconds, then got inside of his car and pulled behind the store. Even though I was terrified, I got the courage to open my door and sprint back inside the store in sheer panic. I explained everything to my manager, while one of my coworkers called the police. Our store manager pulled up the CCTV footage as the police arrived. I sat in horror as the video showed the Honda circling the parking lot just minutes before I came out. As I walked out, you could see the sedan with very noticeable red underglow follow me slowly to my car and park next to me as I got inside of my car. The police made a report and questioned me. A few days later, my dad got a call with some spine-chilling news. We figured out that I had been continuously getting stalked for the past 3 weeks by a 20-year-old man. We had also figured out that the man graduated from the same school I had been attending and that he had been stalking me through an AirTag that he attached under my rear bumper. To this day, we still don't understand or know what his intentions were, but I'm thankful that my gut feeling was right. Unfortunately, he was only given a few citations and 3 days in jail, but I'm glad to be alive and safe. I no longer take my lunches at night and always have a male coworker walk me to my car. When I was a little bit younger, I used to babysit. I did it for about 1.5 years total, and this happened back in 2017 when I was 18 years old. I would mostly babysit for family friends and people that knew my family well. It wasn't something that I would really go out of my way to do that much, but I enjoyed it for the most part, and it was pretty easy money generally. One day, I happened to go to one of the local grocery stores on my way home after the gym. A man approached me inside who I didn't know, but he said, "Hey, aren't you Ariel?" That is in fact my name, and the man then said he was good friends with the Johnsons. The Johnsons were a family that I would occasionally babysit for, and they were family friends of mine. I told him yes, and the man told me that he was just about to call me because he really needed a babysitter for tonight. The man said his name was Mike, and he was average height, had light brown hair, and wore a vest jacket. He apologized for the short notice, but said that his normal babysitter had canceled, and he had heard about me when asking around. I was free that night and didn't have any plans yet, but I had an unsure feeling, probably because I had just met this man. But if he knew the Johnsons, I guess it was all right. He then told me how much he would pay, and said that his son was 5 years old and pretty well behaved. I thought for a second, and then agreed to babysit his son that night. I'm not going to lie, the main reason I accepted it was after finding out how much he was going to pay. He gave me the address and told me to be there at 8 p.m. that night. When the time came, I drove to his house. It was about 20 minutes away, and when I got to the neighborhood, it looked pretty rough. The house was run down looking. I parked on the side of the street in front and texted Mike that I was at his house. He replied saying, "Great, come on in," with an exclamation point. I walked up the driveway, which did not have a car in it at all. I went to the front door, but it was locked, so I texted Mike again. He replied almost immediately, saying that he was sorry and he had forgotten to mention to tell me to go in the side door. Then he told me to go down into the basement to meet his son. I walked around to the side door and opened it. When I got inside the house, it looked almost as bad as the outside. There wasn't much inside, but the things that were appeared to be in really bad shape. There was garbage on the floor, an old beat-up table, and dirty shag carpeting in the living room. The only lights were from a couple of dim lamps. I saw the basement doors open with the stairs leading down, and I saw that the basement appeared to be unfinished. I was getting a really bad feeling about this whole situation. Meanwhile, I was just standing inside the house in front of the basement door for about a minute. Then I felt my phone vibrate as if I was receiving another text. I pulled it out of my pocket and looked at it. It was another text from Mike. He said, "What are you waiting for? Come downstairs already." I didn't respond. I just kept standing there. For some reason, I had a strong urge to just leave the house and felt like going into the basement would be a really bad idea. I was trying to decide if I was just being scared for no reason or if I was actually doing the right thing. If Mike's son's bedroom was down there and Mike was downstairs with him, then everything should be fine. But also, why would his bedroom be in an unfinished basement, and why couldn't he meet me upstairs? In these few seconds, I got another text. It said, "Come downstairs. I don't have all night to wait for you." Going against my instincts, I took a few steps and then began to walk down the stairs. I got another text as I was doing so. It said, "Hurry," in all caps. This was just too much. I had a terrible feeling about going down there, and it was getting worse the farther I went. Something was off about Mike for sure. I turned around and walked back up the stairs. When I reached the top, I heard footsteps from the basement, and it sounded like they were starting to go up the stairs. I walked right back to the door and went outside, closing the door behind me. Once I was completely outside, I sprinted for my car and drove all the way home. I made it home, and once inside, I told my parents that I didn't end up taking the babysitting job after all. After that, I finally looked at my phone again. I had several more texts from Mike. One said, "You shouldn't have left." The next one said, "That's right, I don't even have a kid." Then he said, "My name's not even Mike, and I don't live in that house, so don't even try reporting me." I got the chills when reading this. I think there was definitely something wrong with that guy. To think about how close I came to entering his basement, just knowing I was in his house, really creeps me out. I ended up telling my parents all about it, and then we went to the police. It turns out my parents' friends, the Johnsons, did know who the guy was, but they weren't really friends with him. He just used to be their neighbor for a short time. With all the information we did have, he ended up getting caught. What I still don't know is how he found me in the first place. I used to rent out my basement for Airbnb. I own a 2-story house that has a decent-sized finished basement. A few years back, I had the idea to rent out the basement to make some extra money. The house is way more space than I needed at the time, and it was a bit of an investment. I thought that the basement would be a good place to rent because it was separated from the rest of the house. So I did some work and made it pretty nice down there by getting some new carpet and furniture. Down in the basement, there's a bedroom, a bathroom, and then basically like a large living room. I also added a small kitchen in the corner, which has a sink, stove, and refrigerator, as well as a counter. When everything was completed, I took some pictures and listed it on Airbnb. Because I live only about 5 minutes away from a major city, I knew that people would be wanting to stay in the area. And sure enough, I started to get guests. When people would stay there, I wouldn't even really notice them, because I set up a smart lock on the door leading to the basement. They would arrive after check-in time, and after checkout time, I would go down and clean it. I would also restock some of the things I left for guests, like water bottles in the fridge. My basement had really good reviews, and I was happy about it. Most of the people who stayed there were really nice as well. I didn't meet many of them in person at all, but the few that I did were great. So one time, I had a guy rent my basement for a night. Everything started out normal, and it was just like any other person. The next day, after the checkout time passed, I went down to clean like I always did. Normally, cleaning wouldn't take too long. The place had never been left in a really bad shape before. Most people, it's just about as clean as it was before they checked in. Still, I would do stuff like disinfect the countertops and vacuum the carpet. I would usually go down like an hour or two after they checked out, depending on if I had guests coming for the next night. This time, I didn't have anybody staying there the next night, so I went down a little bit later. It was actually nighttime, probably at about 8 p.m. I started cleaning the countertops and stuff. Everything was still clean, and nothing was messed up or out of place that I noticed. Next, I started vacuuming the carpet. All of the floors down there were carpet, except for a little bit in the kitchen and the bathroom. I started in the living room and soon went into the bedroom. As I was vacuuming in there, I got to underneath the bed. The vacuum seemed to hit something that was underneath the bed, but I didn't know what it was. I stopped and started to look underneath it. That's when I saw a man crawling out from underneath the bed. It was the same guy who had been renting the room. I jumped back and asked him what he was doing here. The guy simply ran right past me and then up the stairs and out the door. I went over and made sure that he left. Then I tried to go on Airbnb and contact the guy, but never got a response. I really don't know what the guy was doing hiding under my bed. It was really weird though, and I will never forget it. I remember the date and time the scariest night of my life happened to me. It was between the hours of 9 and 10 at night on Thursday, July 6th, 2020, so this was during the COVID-19 pandemic. This happened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. At around 9 p.m., I started doing my laundry, starting with the washing machine, which takes around 20 to 30 minutes to wash clothing. With that amount of time to spend, I decided to go outside for a walk around my neighborhood for a nightly breeze while listening to music on my phone wearing earbuds. I was on my way back to the house around 15 minutes before 10. I was walking through a small highway that had no lampposts. It was pretty creepy going through a dark highway with nothing but trees on both sides and hearing the sounds of crickets chirping. I sprinted towards the area with some lampposts that had some lights on. Then I slowed down to walk back to the house. With about a half of a mile to go, I was on the right side of the road when a white car coming the opposite way slowed down. Then, the driver's window lowered and the man yelled at me something involving my wallet. I didn't understand what he had said to me, but then he spoke again, telling me he wanted me to drop my wallet. Not only that, but I also saw he was holding something to me. I couldn't see what it was at first. I have bad eyesight, so I wear contacts, but I wasn't wearing them during my nightly walk. I didn't even think before then to wear my eyeglasses either. Then, it hit me in my mind. The way he was yelling at me to drop my wallet and what he was holding in his hand, I highly believe he pointed a gun at me. I sprinted away back to the house, scared in the back of my mind that he was going to shoot at me or take a sharp U-turn to chase me. I was wearing a white sleeveless shirt, long jeans, and waterproof boots, but I ran without tripping. When I was sprinting, I also looked back every few seconds hoping I wouldn't see the same white car, and I didn't. I made it back to the house, sweating and reflecting on what had just happened to me for the first time, being someone who was never in a situation like that before. Never in my life would I ever think I would be a victim of an attempted robbery. What makes this even scarier is I didn't have my wallet with me. I wish I got the model of the car, the name of the brand, and most importantly, the license plate to report him. But I was too scared to know about that in my fight or flight response, and it would actually be pointless now since I made it back alive and I wasn't followed. This has taught me a lesson, that is, to try and avoid going outside at night, and if you do, to be careful or be with somebody you trust. If you're looking for time to kill during an indoor chore that takes waiting, do something that doesn't involve going outside. Either way, be aware of what happens in situations like this and be safe. Learn from this if you do go out at night. Never go alone. However, I wonder what would have happened if I didn't figure out what was going on longer, or if I told him that I didn't have my wallet. I believe that if I didn't know what was going on any longer, chances are I wouldn't be here.
Lately, I've had a few strange occurrences with a mail truck in my neighborhood. This all started just about 2 weeks ago. I live in what I would say is a pretty average neighborhood. There's a bunch of houses on my street, and I live on the third house from the end. One night, I was up late playing video games, and after finally getting really sleepy, I decided to go to bed. I moved from where I was in the living room to go to my bedroom. When I did this, I turned off the living room lights, and when this happened, I looked out the window to the front yard, which was much more visible now. I saw that right in front of my yard, parked on the side of the street, was a mail truck. It looked just like any typical mail truck used by the post office to deliver the daily mail. The strange part about this was that it was past 1 o'clock in the morning. Plus, my street wasn't all that busy, and cars parked in front of my house were rare. I didn't know anybody who worked at the post office either, so I was confused as to why there was a truck parked outside my house. I stood there, peeking outside the window for at least 10 minutes, watching the truck. I couldn't tell at all who was inside from my angle, but eventually, I saw the truck creep forward and drive until it was about even with my mailbox. Then, it stopped for about a minute, and then drove away. I was feeling really curious what the mailman was doing out there, and I decided to go check my mailbox. It looked like maybe he had put something inside of it, so I walked outside down my driveway, checked my street to make sure the mail truck was really gone, and then opened up my mailbox. Inside of it, there was a small package. I took it out and went inside. When I looked at the package, I saw that there was no stamp on it or anything, just a completely blank box. I opened up the box and was really curious to see what was inside of it, but when I did, the box was empty, nothing inside of it at all. I was really weirded out by this, but ended up just going to bed after that. Just a couple of nights later, I was up late once again. This time, I was sitting on my couch when I heard the sound of a car driving on the street in front of my house. I happened to look out at it and see that it was a mail truck. I looked at the clock, and it was almost 2 in the morning this time. I remembered the other night. It had to be the same truck, but why was it out this late? The truck once again slowed down and came to a stop right in front of my house. This time, the lights in my house were already off. I watched from my front window, careful so that I couldn't be seen. The mail truck sat once again for several minutes without anything happening. This time, the engine seemed to shut off. A few seconds later, I watched a driver emerge from the truck. It was a man, and he was not wearing a mail outfit, but instead, a black t-shirt and jeans. He began walking up into my front yard. There was a path from my driveway to the front door, but this guy didn't seem to be walking to my front door, but more right towards the living room window that I was at. I reached over to the light switch and turned on the living room light. When it went on, I watched the guy turn around and then run back to his truck. He then started the engine and drove away. After that, I haven't seen him since. However, that was only a little bit over a week ago.
I would really like to know what that guy was doing. This story takes place many years ago. I was a young man living out in the Northwest, and in those times, I was spending my summers working odd jobs to help pay for college. I would hitchhike occasionally, and it's not something that I did daily or anything like that, but from time to time, I would use it to get from one city to another. There was one night, though, that made me stop forever. I would say it was probably my 5th time or so hitchhiking. I needed to get to a city about 30 minutes away and didn't have a car. I couldn't figure out if a bus was going to come through anytime soon, so I decided to stand near the side of the road and wait for a car. Several passed me by, until finally there was a car that I saw slow down and then stop next to me. It was a gray car, and the driver already had all his windows down. He leaned his head over to the side of the passenger's window and said hi to me. He didn't seem too friendly, but he asked me where I was going. I told the man, and then he told me to hop in and motioned to the back seat. Based on the couple of words that we said to each other, the guy didn't seem very nice, but I had to make a split-second decision, and I elected to get inside the car. I got in the back, and immediately noticed that the man had a type of barrier set up between the front and back seats of the car, so that when you were sitting in the back, you really couldn't see anything in the front. This made me regret my decision, but literally as soon as I was inside, the man began driving. I couldn't see him or anything, and now I had just hoped that he wasn't a total creep. His windows were all down in the car, and as we started driving at a decent speed, he rolled them up. When he did, I saw that they were all painted black, so I couldn't see out of them at all. Now I felt like I was in trouble. I tried to roll my window back down, but the button next to my seat didn't do anything. I called out to the man, telling him that I didn't want to ride anymore, but I didn't hear anything from him. I knocked on the barrier, which appeared to be very solid, and asked the man if he could hear me. I got no response, and the more we drove, the more worried I became. I was basically just sitting there in a box, not being able to see anything. I tried the door as well, but of course it was locked. I didn't know what more I could do other than just sit there and wonder where we were going. We drove for what felt like a really long time. I don't know exactly how long it actually was, but if I had to guess, it was probably about 30 minutes. At last, I felt the car slowing down, and then finally come to a stop. I heard the doors all unlock, and then heard the driver's door open. The man started walking away, and I decided to open up my door and look outside. I slowly opened it up. I saw outside that there was some sort of dirt road, but it appeared to almost be like a driveway of some sort. I looked around. It was very silent, other than the distant sound of crickets in the night. I wondered where I was and where the man had gone. I didn't hear any cars or see any lights to indicate buildings. As I looked outside further, there appeared to be just a woods and a dirt pavement that we were on. I stepped outside the car to see a grass field with a little shed in the distance, but it didn't really seem like anybody would be inside there. Then I suddenly heard footsteps coming from another direction behind the car. I took off and ran into the woods. I didn't stop running and had so much adrenaline that I probably ran for 10 minutes straight in the woods. I was terrified, but after I got too tired to keep running, I slowed down and didn't hear any noises. I had no idea where I was or how to get to safety. I kept on walking through the woods in the same direction, and eventually I made it to a road. This road was paved and not dirt. I figured I could follow it to get to some sort of town, or at least a gas station or something. The road was quiet, and I began walking on it for maybe 10 minutes before hearing a car in the distance. Then I saw the car start to come around the corner. I feared it was the same man and ran back into the woods until I noticed that it was actually a police car. I then ran out of the woods onto the street. The car saw me, and then I saw the flashing lights turn on. I then ran to the officer, who got out of the car and asked me what I was doing. I told him what had happened, and he was able to drive me to a nearby town. I stayed there for the night, and then decided to just wait for a bus and not hitchhike again. I've been working as a security guard for almost 5 years now. For a few months out of the year, I work at a parking lot in the city. Many times, I'm working late at night, which I don't mind because I like to stay up late anyways. Last fall, I was working really late. It was probably like midnight, and I was working security for the parking lot. It's a fenced-in lot in a busier and more populated area. A lot of people would park their car there every day, but later at night, it was pretty quiet for the most part. I was sitting in my booth with really nothing to do for a while. It was a clear and calm night. I worked until 4 a.m. on this particular day, so I had about 4 hours left. As I was sitting there, I heard the sound of a car door opening and shutting in the lot. This was strange because to get into the lot, you had to enter by using your ticket at the walking gate. Nobody had been there in a while though. Still, somebody could have got to their car and then went on their phone for a bit or something like that. I heard the sound of a car door shutting again, and then again. This continued for like 5 minutes. A door would shut and then open and shut again. I had no clue what was going on. I looked over in the direction, but really didn't see anything. It was dark and the parking lot was pretty big. Then I heard the noise of a car horn honking. All of the noises were coming from the same general area, which sounded like it was in the back corner of the parking lot, farthest away from me. I decided to get up and go investigate. It was quiet and we hadn't had any cars come in a while. I thought maybe somebody was having car problems or something like that. Overall, it just seemed like a pretty weird situation. I walked through the dark and quiet parking lot. I kept hearing the car door opening and then closing again as I did. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw the door close of a car in the back corner of the parking lot. Like I said, there wasn't too many cars in there at that time, but there still were a few here and there. I arrived at the car where I thought the noise was coming from. It was a 4-door sedan, white, and appeared to be a Chevy Malibu. I didn't see anybody though. I noticed that the front passenger side door was open. Couldn't really see anybody in the windows either. I walked a little bit closer to the car to look inside and see if somebody was in the driver's seat or what was going on over here. I got within a couple of feet of the car and sort of peered inside. There looked to be somebody hiding behind the driver's seat of the car, but nobody in the actual driver's seat. They didn't see me because their head was facing in the other direction. It didn't give me a good feeling at all, so I took a step back and then asked, "Is everything okay over there?" The guy didn't answer me. I could no longer see him from where I was standing. I took a couple of more steps back. Then I sort of saw an arm reach out and the car's horn honked. I asked again what was going on, but the guy didn't answer me. I really had no clue what he was doing, so I just walked back to my booth at the front of the parking lot. When I got back, luckily nobody was waiting to get inside or anything like that. I was sitting there for no more than 5 minutes, and I didn't hear any more of the doors opening or closing or honking. Then I heard a car driving in my direction. I knew it had to be that guy, whoever he was. The car seemed to be driving a little bit faster than it should, and then I realized that it wasn't going to stop at the gate. He ended up driving right by the side of the gate that was supposed to stop the cars from driving past without paying. Fortunately, it was one of those really short ones, so if you really tried, you could sneak around it. He drove right past it and out of the parking lot back onto the road. To be honest, I was just glad that he was gone. Thankfully, he never came back either. I'm not really sure what he was doing. Maybe he was trying to get me to go inside his car and was planning to harm me or something. Maybe the guy was just crazy. I'm not sure. I am 23 years old and recently graduated from college. I have a job, but I'm still living with my parents until I get a little more money saved up. In the meantime, I've been living in my bedroom in the basement. It's pretty nice, and I pretty much have my own space down there and have the whole basement. The basement is finished and has my bedroom along with a spare in the hallway. There's also a bathroom down there, and then a large living room area with a TV and such near the stairs to the upper level of the house. One day I had gotten home from work at about 9 p.m. and went down to my room to just relax and watch some Netflix. My parents were gone, so I was alone in the house. I got some food from upstairs and then went down and started a show. I would guess maybe 30 minutes later, I suddenly heard the sound of glass breaking coming from upstairs. I paused my show and listened closely. Could it have been my parents? I listened for their voices, but I didn't hear anything. Then I started to get a horrible feeling. I froze and started to hear footsteps walking around from upstairs. I then heard a voice, but it wasn't the voice of any of my parents. It was a younger sounding man's voice, and then another man's voice. I couldn't make out anything that they were saying, but I could just barely hear the sounds of their voices. At that point, I knew someone had broken into our home. I got out my phone and called the police as quietly as I could, reporting a break-in. I told them to hurry, and they told me they would have the next available police come to our house. Then all I could do was wait. I heard them moving around upstairs, and I was afraid to make a sound. I sat there on my bed hoping they wouldn't come downstairs, and it sounded like they weren't going to. But then about a minute later, I heard the noise of someone walking down the stairs. Each step that they went down, I panicked more and more. When they had reached the bottom, I realized the possible danger that I was in, and I quietly went to my closet and hid inside of it. I closed the door as quietly as I possibly could. Being in there made it harder for me to hear where the men were, but if I listened really closely, I could sort of tell. I heard them walking around, and eventually they made their way to the hallway. My heart started racing at probably about the fastest rate it ever has. I heard footsteps get to the end of the hall where my bedroom was. Then I heard the door open. I closed my eyes and held my breath. But shortly after it opened, I heard footsteps walking back away. I continued to hear them walk around downstairs for a bit. Then I finally started to hear police sirens. The men then went back upstairs, and I stopped hearing them completely. The police arrived a few minutes later, and I finally left my bedroom. As I got out, the police told me they were in pursuit of the vehicle that the man had been in, and later that day they ended up being caught. They had broken in through an upstairs window and stolen several valuable items we had in our house. I guess they didn't see anything worth taking in my room, because they seemed to just open the door and then walk away. My parents were shocked when they got home, but they were overall just glad that I was all right. This happened at the last apartment that I lived at. The complex was just one building that had about 10 units in it. It wasn't too big and was affordable. I lived by myself in a one-bedroom place, but one of my favorite things about the apartment was the surrounding area. It was near a lot of stores and things like that, but directly behind the apartment was a walking trail. The trail was sort of long and went through the woods, connecting to a nearby park that was popular for people to go to during the summer. When I was bored sometimes or wanted to get some exercise, I would walk on the trail. That's what I was doing one night. It was the early springtime, so the sun set pretty early still. My best friend was coming over to hang out when he got off of work, but until then, I had some free time. I had been busy all day and wanted to get out for some fresh air, so I went to walk on the trail like I had many times before. The path started out going along the back part of the apartment property and then went into long portions of woods. I walked for probably 20 minutes and assumed that I would be the only person out there in the dark, but I soon heard the sound of footsteps moving behind me. They sounded like they were maybe 40 feet back at least, just close enough that I could hear them. After a few steps, I realized it was kind of weird for somebody else to be walking at night, but then again, that's exactly what I was doing. I kept walking, but when the footsteps behind me sounded like they were getting closer, I decided to look back and see who was there. When I looked, I heard some rustling of leaves and then saw nobody was there. It appeared whoever had been walking behind me had gone into the woods to hide. Now, this was very suspicious, and I suddenly felt as though I may be in danger. I decided it would be best to find an opportunity to head back to my place. I couldn't just stop and go back, or I would run into the person, but there was a spot coming up where the path split, and one of the paths connected back. As I walked, I soon heard whoever was there get on the path again. I started walking a bit faster. Finally, I saw the path turn into two paths, and I went left. I walked on this for a minute or so until there was an option to connect back to the other side, so I walked on that and was now headed back to my apartment. Whoever was behind me seemed to be getting closer. I turned around again. Once more, whoever was there jumped into the woods. This time, I barely saw part of them as they disappeared. It appeared to be a man, and all I could tell was that he was wearing a dark gray sweatshirt and brown pants. When he was in the woods, I started suddenly running as fast as I could back to my apartment. I didn't look back the entire time at all. At last, I made it back and quickly used my key fob to get inside my apartment building. Then, I was able to feel safe again in my place. I texted my friend, and he said he would head over to my place because he had just gotten done with work. This meant he would be there in roughly 10 minutes. I began making some food because I was pretty hungry, and I lost track of time a little bit. When I looked at the clock, I realized that it had been over 10 minutes, and I figured that my friend was there. I left my apartment and walked down the hallways and then down the stairs to the side door. The side door was the main door that me and my friends would go to instead of the front one. It was just closer to my unit. I walked up to the door and saw someone standing there who I initially assumed was my friend. When I got close though, I realized it wasn't. It was a man in a gray sweatshirt and brown pants, and I knew that he didn't live here. Then I remembered the man from the woods. This guy was wearing the same thing, and I knew it was probably him. I had never seen him before until tonight. He was right up against the door, looking inside, right at me. I was maybe 5 feet away from him. He then tried opening the door, but it was locked. I ran back upstairs to my room and went for my phone. I called my friend, and when he picked up, he said he was just driving into the parking lot now. I told him about the guy, and he told me that he saw him. He wanted to go and ask the guy what he was doing, but I convinced my friend to wait until the guy left before coming in, and just to be safe, my friend went in the front door. I only went walking out on that path a few more times the rest of the time I lived there, and when I did, I certainly never went at night. I used to work at a grocery store. The store was called Cub Foods, and I worked there for about 6 months. I was mostly a cashier there, but sometimes did other things. The store was pretty large, and had just about every kind of grocery item that you would want. We also had a large parking lot that had a big woods up against the back side of it. One time, I worked until about 10 o'clock at night. Things went by fairly smooth, and I worked as a cashier for the entire time. I helped more customers than I could count, and was kept pretty busy until about 8 o'clock at night. Things then kind of dragged on after that. The final hours were always slow when I worked later shifts. Finally, when it was 10 o'clock, I was done. I clocked out and then left the store and headed for my car. I was parked at the back corner of the parking lot up against the woods. My boss told all of us employees to park towards the back of the parking lot so that customers could have the closer spaces. I walked out to my car in the dark and quiet parking lot, and as I approached my vehicle, I heard some noises coming from the dense woods. I looked, but couldn't see anything. It was very dark, and the noises sounded like they were coming from a ways back inside of it. I figured that it was probably an animal of some kind. I looked to see what it was, but the noises then stopped. A few seconds later, I unlocked my car and then went inside of it. Then I went on my phone. After a long day of work, it was common for me to go on my phone for several minutes before driving. I would catch up on a few texts or Snapchats, and then head home. About a minute later, as I was still sitting inside of my car and on my phone, I suddenly heard a noise. It sounded like somebody was walking outside right next to my car. I looked over, and my front passenger side door suddenly opened up. A man was standing there. When I saw him, I was shocked. He was somewhat short, but wearing a jacket with the hood up. I didn't get a good look at his face because of how dark it was. Plus, my memory of the event is a little bit blurry with how fast everything happened. The man told me to turn my car off. I sat there, not knowing what to do. I remember that he told me it again. This time, his voice was louder and more commanding. I didn't. Instead, I put the car into reverse and slammed on the gas. The car jerked back and out of the parking space that I was in. When it did, the man first started to run after me. When I stopped the car to put it into drive, the man just about caught up to me. The passenger side door was still open. After I changed to drive, I sped away just before the man reached me again. I got out of the parking lot as fast as I could. When I was back onto the road, I called my boss at Cub and told her about what happened in the parking lot. She later called the police, but the man was long gone by then. The next time that I worked, she asked me some questions about the incident and filled out a form. I'm glad that I got away from the guy. I believe that he was the noise that I heard inside of the woods. He must have been hiding out there, waiting for someone. I'm not sure what he was planning to do. We do have security cameras, but unfortunately, didn't have any in that spot of the parking lot. My best guess is the guy was going to try to rob me or steal my car. I'm glad he didn't, though. I used to work the front desk in a hotel. I've always been a night owl, so when I was asked to work the night shift for a while, I didn't mind too much. It was actually pretty easy. People rarely came to the desk in the late night hours or the wee hours of the morning. I still had tasks to do, but without me having to deal with people, it made it a more simple job.
On one quiet night, I remember that it was almost 2 a.m. I was behind the front desk, and I heard somebody walking in from the hallway around the corner near where the breakfast area was. I saw a man approaching the desk. He was tall and thin and wore a black t-shirt and jeans. He had dark brown hair and glasses. When he got to me, I greeted him, and he told me that he had just been locked out of his room. I asked the man if he needed a new key and asked him for his room number, but he interrupted me and said that he had the key, but it wasn't working. He motioned for me to follow him. I got out from the desk and followed the man down the hallway. He led me to a room at the back end of the first floor hallway. He showed me the door and said he thought the key reader wasn't working. I went to the door and began to examine it. I asked him to see the key, when suddenly the door opened right in front of me, and the man behind me shoved me inside. I fell forward into the room, and then the door slammed shut behind me. Suddenly, I was on the ground, and it was pitch black in there. I got up and tried opening the door, but it wouldn't move. I think the guy was holding it shut. I went to my pocket for my phone, but I then remembered that it was still plugged in and charging at the front desk. I was stuck in this room with no light, and for some reason they wouldn't let me out. I remained by the door, but now I heard movement coming from the back of the room. There was somebody else in there with me. It seemed as though they were slowly walking closer and closer to me. I had no idea what I was going to do. I asked who they were and why I was in here. Nobody answered me. I was beginning to panic as whoever was in there got within 10 feet of me. I tried the door again, and this time it actually opened. I burst out the door back into the hallway. The man was nowhere to be seen now. I ran all the way back to the front desk and found my phone. I grabbed it and dialed 911. After that, I stayed hidden behind the front desk, ready for anything. But the entire time, nobody came back. The police arrived and looked around, but nobody was in the room. I decided to look and see who was in that room. When I did, it showed that nobody had rented that room, and it was vacant. Whoever was in there was long gone now. I have no clue how I was able to get away, why the guy left the door, or who was inside the room with me. So many questions, but I guess they don't need to be answered. All I know is that I'm okay.
About 5 years ago, I worked as a high school janitor. It's a job that I had for a little over 6 months. This occurred, I think, in April or May. The high school I worked at was somewhat small, and I worked the overnight shift. My hours were weeknights from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. When I started work, there would usually be nobody there, and when I got off, there would occasionally be some people coming in early, but usually not many. On this night, it was shortly after I started, about 11:30 p.m., and I was mopping some of the floors in one of the west hallways. I was the only person in the entire school, and it was always sort of weird being all by myself in the school. The lights in the hallways were motion-sensing lights, so it was almost all dark other than the area that I was in. As I was right in the middle of mopping the hallway floor, I suddenly heard the sound of a basketball bouncing from inside the gym. For the first second, I thought nothing of it, until I realized that it was almost midnight and nobody else was supposed to be here. I stopped mopping and listened. I could barely hear it, and then it went away. The hallway that I was in was pretty close to the gym. There was another long, narrow hallway, and then some locker rooms were in between. I left my mop and walked down the narrow hallway to the basketball court. It was dark, and when I got to the door and opened it up, I could see that the lights in the gymnasium were all on, and a basketball was sitting on the ground up against a wall, but I didn't see any people in the gym anywhere. Clearly, somebody had just been in there, because the lights were on, and I had for sure heard the ball bouncing. There were a number of places where somebody could go, or be hiding. I knew this was unlikely, but I thought maybe a teacher, coach, or player on the basketball team had stayed late for some reason. If this was the basketball season, that's what I would have thought, but the basketball season had been over for like a month. I called out, asking if anybody was there, but no one responded. I then walked over and checked the coach's offices that were nearby. All of their lights were out and doors were shut. I then walked down the hall past my mop again to look out into the parking lot. It was completely empty aside from my car. I walked back over to my mop to continue, but as soon as I entered the hallway again, something caught my eye. I looked down to the very far end of the hall where I had seen something. I was just on time to see what appeared to be a man ducking into a room. The room was my janitor's closet. I yelled at the guy, asking what he was doing. I tried to sound loud but friendly, but probably came across as just nervous. To be honest, I was pretty creeped out. It didn't look like a student or a teacher. I asked whoever was there to leave the room, and I stayed all the way back at my end of the hallway, probably a good 150 feet away. After several minutes passed, and whoever was in there was clearly not leaving, I decided to go and confront them. I walked down the hallway to my janitor's room. When I got probably 20 feet away, a terrible nervous feeling came over me. I was almost shaking by the time I reached the door. I really don't know why I felt I had to open the door to tell them to leave looking back. I could have just called the police, but I guess you never know how you're going to react in certain situations, and it's easy to look back at them and point things out. Anyways, I was standing in front of the door for a few seconds before I psyched myself up and opened it. When the door opened, the room was mostly all dark, with my cleaning supplies and tools in their usual places. I didn't see the guy, but less than a second after opening the door, suddenly I saw a large wooden pole headed for my head. I ducked down, narrowly missing it. I backed out and slammed the door shut and sprinted away. It seemed as though whoever was in there swung the top end of a wooden broom right at me. I didn't stop running until I was actually out of the building, and then I called the police. It didn't take long at all for them to get there, maybe like 2 minutes. When they arrived, they entered the school, and no more than 5 minutes later came out with the guy. He was a creepy looking dude, and I honestly don't know when or how he got into the school. I'm also not sure why he tried to attack me, but that was enough to make me start looking for another job. I'm a female and recently graduated from college. This story happened to me last year when I first got my degree and started my real job. I moved into the city and got an apartment that I really liked. It was right near downtown and I could walk to lots of places. The apartment building itself was rather large and had many people living there on several floors, but it was very nice inside and came with furniture. I remember when I first got done moving in, my neighbor from across the hall came over and introduced himself as Carl. Right away, he kind of gave me the creeps. He just seemed a little bit off. He asked me a few questions about myself and then basically asked me out within 5 minutes of meeting. I politely said no, but he didn't seem too happy about it. Over the first few months of living there, he always seemed to leave his apartment at the same time as me. He would always say hi and ask me where I was going. I like when people are friendly, but the way he would say things was just borderline creepy, but I tried to be nice about it overall. Eventually, though, it just became too much and I would kind of try to avoid him. Then one night, as I was eating in my living room by myself, I heard a small noise outside my door. I quietly got up and walked over to it, trying not to make a sound. I looked out at my peephole and saw Carl crouched down on the floor looking at my front door. I wasn't really sure what he was trying to do, if he was planning to open the door or if he was trying to eavesdrop on me, but it was very creepy either way. Finally, after about a minute, he left. This had become a little bit too much, and I considered reporting him or even moving. The next day, I had my friend over after work, and we hung out in my apartment for a bit. Then we both went out to the parking garage where we said goodbye. I went back up to my apartment after that. When I got back inside, I was getting some water when I heard a noise coming from the hallway. I couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from, so I walked over to see. I looked around but didn't really see anything at all. I even went into my bedroom and looked around. Then I knew I heard the sound of footsteps coming from inside my living room, so I ran to my bedroom door and shut it. Thankfully, it had a lock on it. I locked the door, then I heard footsteps coming towards it, and Carl's voice asked me to come out. I was silent and dialed 911 on my phone. Carl then tried to open the door, but once he realized it was locked, he called out saying he was strong and he knew he would be able to break the door down, so I should just come out. I didn't doubt that he could because it was a pretty weak door. With 911 on the phone, I opened my window and went for the fire escape. I tried to do it as quietly as I could. Once I got the window open and was going out, I heard Carl start shouting and banging on the door. I climbed out and was able to make it down. Then I ran across the street to a local supermarket. I waited there until the police showed up and arrested Carl. He had been able to sneak into my apartment because I had forgot to lock it when I went to the parking garage. I went to the movies with my girlfriend. It was a weeknight and the theater was not very busy, but neither of us worked the next day, so we could stay up as late as we wanted. We went to one of the latest movies playing at the theater. I think it started at like 10 p.m. or so. When we got there, we saw immediately how quiet the theater was, which was nice. After getting to our seats, we realized that we were the only people at this particular movie. That was pretty cool, and it's something that's never happened to me before. We could sit any place we wanted to, and we chose towards the top and in the exact middle for the best view. As we watched the previews, we thought maybe somebody else would come into the movie, but nobody did. The movie started, and about an hour went by. When it was more than half over, I saw out of the corner of my eye somebody entering the auditorium. I looked over and saw a man walking in. It struck me as really strange, because the movie was more than half over by now. Why was he just getting here now? The guy looked around the theater and seemed to look at me for a second, then he walked up to the front, and I think he went in either the very first row or the second row. He seemed to have sort of long hair, and within seconds I no longer saw him. He kind of sat back in his seat so far that he was completely out of view. After that brief distraction, my girlfriend and I were whispering to each other about how strange it was for the guy to get there so late, and then we went back to watching the movie. About 10 minutes later is when I noticed him again. He turned around and then stuck his head up from his seat. He was looking right at us and slowly making himself taller and taller so that he was towering over his chair and getting in the way of the screen. In the dark theater, I couldn't tell much details of the man, aside from his sort of long hair and what appeared to be a small beard. I whispered to my girlfriend, "Is this guy serious?" We laughed a little, but after about 15 seconds, it was really unfunny. The guy finally lowered back down and disappeared behind his seat again. After about 5 more minutes, he was at it again. This time, we observed him crawling out of the aisle that he was in and into another one a few rows behind. Then he just sat there facing us, staring at us. It was starting to get creepy, and we were getting uncomfortable with this guy in there. I considered walking over to the man and asking him what he was doing, but I really didn't want to. The movie had maybe 30 minutes left, and so we decided to just try our best to ignore him. Then he stood up and just like that walked away towards the exits. My girlfriend looked at me and whispered, "Finally." I replied, "I know, right?" After that, we watched the ending of the movie. When it was over, we got up to leave. We both walked to the side where the stairs were that led down to the exit. After going down a few steps, I'm really not sure why, but I just decided to lean over the railing and look down to the other side. When I did, I saw the weird guy. He had never even left the theater. He was up against the wall, as if he was hiding from us and just waiting for us to walk around the corner. I told my girlfriend to stop. She was ahead of me, like 5 steps further than I was, maybe 5 more from the bottom. She stopped and looked back at me. I waved her to come back to me, and as I was doing this, I saw the guy look up and notice me. We made eye contact, and I just asked the guy what he was doing. He got up and went around the corner and started walking fast up the stairs toward us without saying a word. My girlfriend and I both ran across to the other side of the seats. When we did, the man sped up and started to run. I didn't think we would be able to make it back around to the exit, so I found an emergency exit door that went right to the outside, and I ran to it and went out. We came out on the side of the building and both ran all the way back to my car. I was just happy we were both back in the car and safe and could drive home. I think something might have been wrong with that guy. I'm really glad I spotted him, because I don't know what he was planning to do. Last fall, I went to the first concert of my life. I'm a female and in college, and at the time of the concert, I was a sophomore. I went with a few of my college friends who asked me to go with them. They couldn't believe I had never been to a concert before, and they were excited for me to go with. To be honest, I wasn't all that interested in going at first, but after my friends convinced me, I figured it would be a lot of fun. When we got there, it was at a basketball arena, but it was set up for the concert, and we had tickets that were really close, sort of up by the stage. I remember that a few hours in, the crowd was getting really into it, and my friends and I got up and started dancing. In the midst of all of this, something caught my eye. There was a guy standing there among the crowd wearing a really creepy mask. The mask covered his whole head, and it had a really exaggerated smile on it. The guy seemed to be locked onto me and staring right at me. Of course, there's a lot of wild people at concerts, and I wouldn't have cared at all aside from the fact that wherever I seemed to move, he would keep staring at me. I ignored it. I knew he was probably just some weirdo trying to scare people or annoy them. Several more times over the next hour or so, he caught my eye and was staring at me every single time, but he would be in different locations. This guy was creepy for sure, but I wasn't going to let him ruin my experience of going to my first ever concert. When it ended, it was late at night and everyone left. The venue was right in downtown of the city, and we parked several blocks away. It took like 20 minutes to walk back to the car that our friend Jordan had driven. When we finally got to the street that we had parked on, it was much quieter and nobody else was really over there. We were walking down the street and I heard footsteps behind me. I looked back and saw the guy in the mask again. Was it a coincidence that he was walking down this street, or was he following me? He was still staring, and when my friends saw me looking back, they looked as well. We all thought this guy was really creepy, how he was right behind us, staring at me. The guy was like 40 feet back, and when we went forward, he would do the same, but when we stood still, he did the same thing as well. My friends and I asked the guy what he wanted, but he didn't answer and instead just kept staring. We kept walking and eventually made it back to our car. As we were about to get inside, a car pulled up on the street out of nowhere and stopped right next to the guy in the mask. He got inside of it, and then the car parked behind us a ways down the street. We sat there and waited because we were afraid the car was going to follow us. We both sat there for probably about 10 minutes, I would say, and eventually the other car just pulled away and left.
A few years ago, I went on a trip to California to visit friends. I lived a few states away and was going to fly in, but I needed a place to stay while I was there. First, I looked at hotels, and they were difficult to find, so I decided to check out Airbnbs as well. Those were also hard to find. After a long time of searching, I finally found an Airbnb that seemed to be a really good deal. It was certainly cheaper than any hotels, and seemed like it would work just fine for me. But from the start, the owner of the room seemed a little bit sketchy. The way the ad was written was a little bit odd. There were some spelling errors, and the pictures were sort of weird. The place also didn't have any reviews yet. So when I first saw it, I kept looking. But after not finding anything with nearly as cheap of a price, I considered it again. It was a very small house, and I would have the whole place to myself. The value just seemed way better than any other place that I had looked at. Everybody was most likely scared off by the less than ideal photos and description. After all, most of the listings you see on Airbnb look to be professionally photographed and well written. Plus, there was no reviews yet, so I decided to just go for it. Having a whole place to myself would be really nice, as opposed to just having a small room or staying in somebody's basement. I reserved the place and was slightly nervous for it, but more excited to go to California and visit my friends. When the time came, after my flight, I took a Lyft to the location. It was towards the end of a quieter street and seemed to have a decent-sized yard. I had instructions on where the key was, which was hidden in the backyard. After I got it, I went inside the house. It was pretty much just how it looked online, and I was feeling good about it. The place was very small, but good enough for me, and I was proud of myself for getting such a great deal. It was one level and didn't have an upstairs or basement. There was just a kitchen, a living room, one bedroom, and a bathroom. I was in the house for a little bit and then left to meet up with my friends. I hung out with them for basically the rest of the night. Later that evening, I returned to my small Airbnb at probably about 10 p.m. When I got inside, I started to get ready for bed. I was really tired, and within maybe 10 minutes, I was about to get into the bed. I turned out all of the lights in the small house and was making my way over to the bedroom. That's when I saw what looked like somebody walking past the window in the backyard. It really took me by surprise, and I stopped walking and looked. But by that time, the person was now out of my view. In the backyard, it was very dark. The only reason that I had seen the person at all was because I had turned all the lights inside off. I didn't get a good look at them, but it seemed to be a man. I walked over to the window and looked out, but by now saw nobody. After that, I went over a couple of other windows and looked out, but also saw nothing. I decided to try to go to bed now, although I wasn't quite as tired anymore. When I got into the bedroom, though, I saw the man again. Once more, I didn't get a good look at him at all. He briefly moved past the window, which wasn't very big. Now I knew somebody was prowling around out there, and I was really concerned. I went back into the living room and looked out of that window. When I didn't see anything, I went all around to the other windows. There were no shades or blinds for the windows at all, which was too bad. I wanted to cover them. The windows were not very big, but I just didn't want whoever was walking around to be able to get in or see inside. I made sure the door was locked and then stayed up for a little while. When I didn't see anything for like 30 minutes, I finally got tired again and went back to the bedroom. I got in bed and tried to just ignore the bad feeling that I had. I really wanted to get some sleep. Whoever was out there didn't try to get in or anything, so I was telling myself that I would be okay. I laid in bed for no more than 5 minutes before I started to feel very paranoid. I opened my eyes and looked up. When I did, I saw there was a man staring right in the window. This time, I got a good look at his face. When he saw me, he ducked straight down after like a second. He looked really familiar to me though. For a few seconds, I didn't know where I had seen him. Then I remembered. I ran into the small hallway, which was the only area with no windows. I went on my phone and onto the Airbnb app. That's when I realized that the man in the window was the owner of the Airbnb. He had been staring into the window, watching me try to sleep. I wanted to get out of there. I knew that he likely had keys. After all, he owned the place. I packed up all of my things right then and there and left. When I left the house, I ran for my car, but didn't see or hear the guy. Then I drove to a random parking lot and tried to find a hotel for the night. I had to drive a ways away and also pay more than I wanted to, but I got lucky and was able to find a hotel room. I also reported the man to Airbnb. When I sent him a message about it, he completely denied everything. After that, I never used Airbnb again.
I used to work at Applebee's as a waitress a couple of years back when I was younger. I worked there in total for about 6 months. For the most part, I liked the job right up until the end, and I would make decent money in tips. The reason that I quit, though, has caused me to not want to work at a restaurant again. During the time that I worked there, I lived in a small apartment which had a door that opened right up to the outside. Out of nowhere, I woke up one night to hear somebody knocking on my front door at 3 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, this couldn't be anything good. The knock was a fast and steady knock, which lasted for about 20 seconds before it stopped. I got out of bed and walked over to look out the peephole. By the time I got there, though, whoever had been there was now gone. I was a little creeped out by this, but after a while, I was able to go back to bed. Several nights later, though, the same thing happened again. Once more, by the time I looked outside, whoever had been there was gone. This ended up happening several more times. Each time, I would get a knocking on my door at 3 a.m., and by the time I would look outside, nobody would be there. It would happen at very random nights too, so I never knew when to expect it. Then, one night, as I was working at Applebee's, it was like any other. It was maybe 10 p.m. when a man came in by himself and was sitting at a booth in the corner. I ended up being his waitress, and he was just like any other customer for the most part. He was quiet, but nothing stuck out to me. But when he left, I went to clean his table, and I saw on the receipt he left at the table something was written on it. It had written that he knew where I lived, and he was watching me. I immediately showed the note to coworkers, and I had to believe it was the same person who had been knocking on my door late at nights. I made sure to leave with a coworker in case the guy was watching me in the parking lot or something. I went to the police that same night with the note, but after that, the man never knocked on my door at night again. There wasn't really anything that the police could do. I quit shortly after that. Looking back, I have a lot of questions. I don't know why the man left me that note, and I don't know why he stopped knocking on my door. Maybe he knew I had gone to the police somehow, and I'm just glad I haven't seen him again. This happened roughly 5 years ago. I was at Baskin-Robbins one night and went inside to get a shake. The location was about 10 minutes away from my house, in a little shopping area where I went all the time. I would guess it was about 8 p.m. or so. I know that it was nighttime, and not really anybody else was there. I ordered, and was standing inside waiting, when I noticed a man through the side of the window of the building. It looked like he was walking on the sidewalk and towards the front doors. I remember expecting him to come inside the doors, but instead, he just stopped and kind of pressed his head up against the window for a second and looked inside. Then he walked away. I thought it was a little bit weird. I could see that the guy had a long beard and wore sunglasses and kind of beat up clothes. It looked like he was homeless to me. I went on my phone after that for a minute or so. When I looked over again, the guy was gone completely. My shake was done within the next minute, and I picked it up and left. I walked out the door and was headed to my car, but immediately after exiting the building, I saw the homeless guy again. He He was standing next to the building on the sidewalk, but farther down. He said hey to me and started walking in my direction. I looked over and waved, but really didn't want to talk to the guy. I just wanted to get to my car. The guy came up to me and I could see that he was limping. I kept on walking to my car and didn't stop. He basically followed me all the way over there. He said hi to me again and asked if he could talk to me for a minute. I asked him how I could help him, and he told me that he was homeless and had just sprained his ankle earlier that day. I said sorry and thought maybe he was going to ask me for money or something. Instead, the man asked if I would be nice enough to drive him to the McDonald's down the road. I looked and saw the McDonald's. It wasn't too far down the street at all. It was just across a busier street and then like 3 businesses down from where we were. I had a bad feeling about it, and I didn't know this guy. I just really didn't want to give him a ride. I wanted to help people, but something about this guy just seemed way too sketchy. I told him sorry but no, I was really in a hurry and was going in the opposite direction. Of course, I made up the second part. I wasn't in a hurry, but I felt like I needed to give the man a good reason. He asked again, and I just told him no and I couldn't do it. Then I got inside my car. I felt really bad, but I didn't want the guy getting in my car with me. He just seemed sort of creepy. The guy stood there right next to my driver's door for a few seconds, and then slowly walked away. I got inside of my car and locked the doors. I felt much safer now, but I also felt bad at the same time. Was I a bad person for not giving him such a short ride? I looked in my mirror and noticed the guy walking away still. He was going to the parking lot of the business next to Baskin-Robbins, which was a Chipotle. When he got to the Chipotle, I saw him suddenly speed up his walking and start to walk at a really fast speed. He was no longer limping. I then saw him walk up to a car, pull out some keys, unlock the car and get inside. Once inside, I watched him pull his beard right off his face. My jaw dropped as I saw this. He then backed out and drove away.
This happened when I was a kid. At the time, I was probably about 12 years old. I remember that occasionally we would go to Carl's Jr. because there were several in the area. I was with my mom, and I think we were shopping or something during the day. On the way home, we were picking up food for us, as well as my brother and dad who were at home. When we got to Carl's Jr., my mom parked in the parking lot and asked if I wanted to come inside with her. I told her that I just wanted the California burger meal and I would wait. I didn't feel like going in and standing in line with her and would rather wait out in the car. My mom left and went inside. As I sat there, I just sort of looked around the parking lot. I watched a couple of people go in and out of the restaurant. It had just gotten dark outside, and there were maybe 7 or 8 other cars in the parking lot if I had to guess. A couple of minutes after my mom went in, I saw a man walk out of the Carl's Jr. The guy started walking over towards me. My mom's car was a white SUV, and we were parked on the back side of the parking lot, not right up against the building. There wasn't a car next to us, so I was a little bit confused when the guy seemed to be headed straight for me. I honestly didn't think he would reach my mom's car. I thought he would turn and go to his car, whatever one that was, but he didn't. Eventually, he reached me. He didn't go to the window or try to open the door though. Instead, he just kind of paced around at the back side of the car where I couldn't really see him. He was kind of in the blind spot, and I had no clue as to what he was doing. I just remember that he was wearing a reddish colored jacket and a baseball cap. I also remember he had sort of a beard. He seemed to go around the back of the car to the other side. I was getting uncomfortable and was hoping that my mom would come back out soon. I looked back to the door of the Carl's Jr., hoping to see my mom, but she wasn't coming out yet. In fact, the parking lot all around was pretty quiet at that moment. Suddenly, I heard the back passenger side door open up. I was seated in the front passenger seat, and it really caught me off guard. I guess I had forgotten to lock the car doors. Without thinking, I jumped over the center console to the driver's seat of the car and went for the door. I'm not sure why exactly I didn't go out my door. I think it was because I was trying to get as far away from this guy as I could. Luckily for me, I was pretty small and flexible back then, and going over to the other seat like that was fairly easy. But as I was crossing over, I felt a hand on my back, which was from the guy in the back seat. He didn't say anything, or at least I don't remember him saying anything. I was just desperate to get away from him. When I had made it across to the other seat, I opened up the door and ran outside. I sprinted across the parking lot and into the Carl's Jr. restaurant. When I made it inside, I looked around for my mom, who was standing on the side waiting for the order. I ran to her and told her that some guy had gotten into the car. She went out to the parking lot and I followed her. By the time we had gotten back to the car, the guy was gone, but the back door was wide open. I have no idea where the man went. Looking back at that experience, though, I wonder what he was trying to do. More than likely, I think he was going to try to abduct me. I believe he was inside the restaurant looking outside, and when he saw my mom leave me in the car, he left. That gives me the chills to think about.
About a year ago, my wife and I were having a fire in our backyard with a few friends. It was something that we occasionally did on weekends or whenever, really. When it got to be sort of late and our friends left, we put out the fire and went inside for the night. I was pretty exhausted, so I fell asleep really quickly. However, I was woken up in the night by something. I didn't know exactly what it was that woke me up, so I sat up and looked around. Everything seemed to be just fine and I didn't hear anything, so I decided to go back to bed. But as soon as I laid down, I heard the noise of something falling coming from the living room. This made me sit up in bed and be completely silent. I heard my wife wake up and she asked me what that noise was. I told her it was probably nothing and I would go check it out, but I was actually pretty concerned because we didn't really have anything that would just fall over randomly. I slowly walked to the bedroom door and opened it. As soon as I opened the door, I was looking directly at a man who was in our house. He was wearing an orange ski mask and I slammed the door shut as soon as I saw him. He had probably been just about 10 feet away. I ran over to the phone and called the police. Things got really quiet in the rest of the house, so I thought the man had run away and I told the police that I thought they had ran off. But after I was done talking to the police on the phone, I heard another noise in my house. This creeped me out pretty badly. I hoped whoever it was would not come in the bedroom. My wife and I stayed in the room, armed with whatever heavy objects we could get our hands on. It was some pretty tense moments waiting for the police to arrive, hoping that the door to the bedroom wouldn't open. I knew the man was still in the house because we had heard movements, but thankfully they weren't coming from near our bedroom. Finally, the police arrived, and I saw flashing lights coming down the street. The police made entrance to the house and eventually got to the bedroom. I assumed they had caught the man, but then they asked me where I thought he went. I told them I had heard noises from the living room, and they ended up searching the entire house, but the man was never found. It turns out I had left the back door open from the fire we had had, and the man just walked right in. I suppose that's the same way he left too, but it just scares me that he was never caught. It's also a little strange that he didn't appear to take anything either.
This is my scariest story from when I worked as a night janitor. I've since quit the job, and this was a couple of years ago. I worked cleaning an office building at night, and it was my job to vacuum, sweep, and sanitize certain areas, as well as clean bathrooms. Pretty much what you would expect. The office building was a pretty typical one. Several floors, cubicles, and offices all around. It wasn't crazy big, enough that I could keep it clean during my overnight shift. One night, I was working and was a few hours in. Usually, it would just be me by myself and a security guard who worked on the first floor. We were the only two people in the building in the overnight hours. As I was cleaning in the office, I was near the stairs and suddenly heard someone walking near, and then open up the door from the stairwell. It was not the security guard, but another man. I did recognize him though. When I worked, my last hour would sometimes overlap with some of the guys who were getting into work on Fridays early. This office started work at like 6 or 7 a.m. on some Fridays and then ended at 10 a.m. It was like a half-day thing, which I never knew too many details about. But the point is, I did recognize this guy as someone who I had seen working in the office. I didn't know his name or anything, just his face. I asked him what he was doing here at this hour, which was like 1 a.m. The man said to me that he had forgotten something at his office and apologized and then just walked right past me. This was a little strange. I knew he worked there, but he seemed to be in a big hurry, so I just went back to work. I cleaned around the area for the next 30 minutes or so. It wasn't until then that I realized I never saw the man leaving. There was another exit, but it was way at the other end. I hadn't seen or heard the guy at all. I walked back over to where I had seen him walking to. I didn't see anybody or anything different. Something about it just seemed strange and I had a bad feeling, so I went down to talk to the overnight security guard on the first floor. When I got down there and spoke with him,
He said he hadn't let anybody in the building at all since his shift started, and he hadn't seen anybody leave either. Now I was really confused. There was only one entrance or exit to the building where people would enter, other than some emergency exits. We both went upstairs to see if the man was still there. We searched up and down through the cubicles and other areas on the second floor. The man was nowhere to be found. There were some offices for the higher-ups in the company where we hadn't looked yet. There was no reason really for the guy to be in there, but just out of precaution, we decided to give it a shot. When we entered the first office and turned on the lights, suddenly I saw something move. It was under the desk, and sure enough, it turned out to be the same guy from before. We asked him what on earth he was doing hiding under the desk. This wasn't even his office either. The security guard asked the man for his company ID card or any kind of identification, but the man refused. We were forced to call the police then. The man kept complaining that he worked here, saying that he was going to have us fired if we didn't let him go. When the police arrived, we let them handle the situation for the most part. I found out some crazy details afterwards. The guy did used to work for the company, but had been fired almost a month prior. He had entered the building during business hours and hid inside a bathroom, somehow going undetected until 1 a.m. when he came up and I saw him. He went to his old boss's office and was planning to confront him when he got in for work that morning. I'm not sure if he wanted to fight him or what, but thankfully he didn't have any weapons on him. This was by far the weirdest and creepiest thing that ever happened in my time working there.
I remember that when I was a kid, Toys R Us was my favorite store to go to. I wouldn't get to go there all that often, but when I did, it was just amazing how there was an entire big store just for toys. When I was probably like 10 years old, I went with my mother one day. It was my sister's birthday later that week, and my mother was looking to get her some presents. Of course, I was happy to go with, but when we got there, we went over to the girls section, which didn't really interest me. I wanted to go over to the race cars and the action figures and stuff like that, or better yet, the video games. I knew where my mother would be, and I didn't see a big deal in going to the other end of the store while she looked. However, I only had to go a few aisles over to find some things that interested me more. Like most times I was there, I saw so many things that I wanted, and I felt like I could spend hours in the store. I came across the Lego aisle, and I saw some of the cool displays they had. That was another thing that I really liked about Toys R Us, is how they would have little displays everywhere throughout the store. Anyways, I was just looking around, and picked up a couple of the Lego people in the display just to look at them, when suddenly I was grabbed from behind out of nowhere. I hardly noticed anybody else in the area at all that I had been there. I was really startled and looked up to see a guy with grayish hair and a blue jacket on. I then noticed his Toys R Us employee tag. He told me I wasn't supposed to touch the display and that I was in big trouble. I told the guy sorry, and he asked me where my mother was. I said she was a few aisles over and pointed. I expected the man to walk me back over to her, but instead, the guy started walking in the opposite direction, all while gripping onto my arm tightly. I told the guy I was sorry and I wouldn't do it again, but he said that it was too late. We walked up to the front area of the store, and now I was getting nervous. I thought I was in some serious trouble, and I didn't know it was really that bad. I hadn't broken anything. Then, we walked past the registers and headed out of the store for the parking lot. When we started to leave, that's when I got a really bad feeling. It wasn't until that point that it occurred to me that maybe this guy didn't work at Toys R Us at all. The problem was, now we were out of the store and my mother was still inside. His grip got tighter on my arm as we walked through the parking lot. The store wasn't too busy and there really weren't that many cars in the parking lot. When we reached what appeared to be the man's car, I noticed there was a car parked a few rows across with a mother and another kid getting out. I waved to the kid out of kind of desperation and said hi to him. The kid waved at me, and I remember the mom seemed to look over and saw how the guy was sort of pulling on my arm. The guy must have noticed this, and to look less suspicious, let my arm go, and he now pushed on my arm instead of grabbing it. He was trying to lead me into his car, and as soon as his grip was gone, though, I took off running over to the store as fast as I could. No doubt I was much faster than that guy. At first, he tried running after me, and I was really scared, but once I had made it about 20 feet, I knew he wouldn't be able to catch up with me. I had a great feeling of relief as I crossed the doorway back inside the store, and then ran to find my mother, who was now standing near the front end. She looked concerned and asked me where I had gone. I told her, and it led to a whole big thing. The police came down to the store, and the manager and several other employees gathered around. I didn't realize just how big of a deal it was at the time, and how lucky I was to have gotten away from the man, but now I'll never forget it. Last summer, I was traveling with my wife. We were going home from a wedding we attended about 4 states away from where we lived. The drive was too long to make it one day, so we would have to stay in a hotel for one night. On the way there, we stayed in a pretty decent hotel, roughly halfway. We were hoping to stay there on the way back as well, but when we looked, the prices were much higher, and it had a lot less availability. I figured it wasn't a big deal, and there would be plenty of other nice hotels we could stay at on the way back. My wife and I took turns driving on the way back. I drove for a while, and then let my wife drive the next few hours. Then I returned to driving that night. At about 10 p.m., I started to get really sleepy. I looked over and saw that my wife was already fast asleep. I wasn't quite sure exactly where we were, so I pulled off the highway at the next exit to stop and look. I went into a gas station and filled up my tank. When I was done, I got on my phone and searched hotels near me. The search came up with about 3 of them that seemed to be in the area, and there wasn't very many in the surrounding area. I clicked on the first one I saw, and the rates were pretty cheap. I then looked at the other 2. Unfortunately, none of them seemed all that nice, but it was late, and I really just wanted a place to sleep because I was getting more and more tired. I chose one and drove to it, which was only about 5 minutes away. When we arrived, my wife woke up. I asked her if this place looked alright to stay for the night, and she said yes, it seemed good enough. The place had an upper and lower level of rooms, and they all opened right up to the outside parking lot. There didn't seem to be many people there, because there wasn't very many cars in the parking lot. However, based on some of the older, rusty cars around the parking lot, I could tell it wasn't the nicest place in town. I got outside and went into the office. I got a room, and then went back to our car, grabbed my suitcase, and then my wife and I went to our room, which was on the ground level. Once we got into the room, we weren't all too impressed, even after our expectations had been set low. The TV was still a box version, and the bathroom mirror had several noticeable smears on it. We were too tired to care though, and got to bed and fell asleep rather quickly. However, we were woken up not too long after that. I heard loud bangs coming from the door of our hotel. Our blinds were shut, so I couldn't see who was there when I woke up. I looked at the clock, and it was 2 a.m. Who could this be? I got up out of bed slowly, and the knocks continued. I got to the door and was going to open it, but decided to check the people instead. There were 2 large men standing outside the door. They both wore black jackets and did not look very friendly at all. They seemed to be angry for some reason. I watched the guy bang loudly on the door just inches from where my eyes were looking at him on the other side. I did not want to open the door for him. I had a bad feeling about this. As they kept knocking, I was wondering what I should do. I kept looking out the people and saw the other man who was standing at the door walk over towards the window. He then started knocking on the window. This continued for several minutes before finally it stopped. I watched the men seemingly walk away down the sidewalk in front of the hotel. My wife asked me what that was all about. I told her that I had no idea. At this point, I decided to go outside and look around. I opened the door and looked. I didn't see anyone or anything, but I really didn't feel like going out any further. I didn't feel safe. I went back inside and decided to just go back to sleep. It took a while, but eventually we were able to. When we woke up the next morning, we were pretty much ready to leave right away. The hotel didn't have breakfast or anything like that, and we hadn't brought much inside. I showered, got dressed, and then we left. It was about 7 a.m. when we left the hotel room and brought our things out to the car. When we got to our car and were getting inside, I noticed another car parked against the back side of the parking lot facing us. I saw the 2 guys I had seen in the people the previous night. They were sitting in the front 2 seats of the car, and I recognized them as the ones who had been knocking on our door. I pointed them out to my wife. She was confused at first, until I explained to her those were the men that were knocking. As I was putting my suitcase in the trunk of our car, I saw the doors to the car that the men were in open up, and they began to walk towards us. We hurried to get inside the car, and as soon as I was able to, I started the engine. The men were parked pretty far away, so they were only about halfway to us by the time I started to drive away. We left and didn't look back. Luckily, we weren't followed or anything like that. To this day, I'm not sure what those men wanted or why they were watching us.
When I was a kid, my family used to go to Costco almost every Saturday. It was kind of a routine for us, and we would typically go in the morning. We would get most of our groceries for the week, so it would take us about an hour to do so, but for some reason, I always had a good time going. One day, I think my sister was at her friend's house or something, and my dad was working on his car, so it was just my mom and I who went to Costco that week. I think I was maybe 8 years old, so part of the memories are a little bit blurry. I do remember that after we got there, we first went to get cereal, and then some snacks. After that, the rest of the items that we got didn't interest me as much. We shopped for close to an hour, and after filling the cart almost all the way full, we were almost done. My mom was still looking at a few things though. I was bored, and I wandered off a little bit to look at more interesting things. I never really went that far away from my mom. I usually just stayed in the same aisle as her. This aisle, however, started to get really busy, as I was at one end and my mom the other. By the time I made it back to where I thought my mom was, she was now gone. I walked to the next aisle over, but she wasn't there either. I decided to go out of the aisles towards the front of the store where you could see more. When I walked over there, the store was really busy, and with all the people, I had no idea where she was. Just then, I saw a man walk up to me and tell me that my mom was looking for me. I remember that I asked him where she was, and he told me she was leaving and I'd better hurry. I suddenly got really nervous and began walking to the front of the store. The guy told me to follow him, and we both started walking pretty quickly towards the exits. I was 100% convinced for some reason that my mom had left the store without me. Looking back, I can't believe how stupid I was, but the guy seemed really convincing. Plus, I was just 8 years old. I remember we made it to the exit doors, and we were right about to leave, when I suddenly heard my mom's voice. She was yelling, and it sounded like she was still inside the store. I looked behind me and saw her running towards me. She was just passing by the check lanes. I looked back to the man, but he had now disappeared. He must have left when I looked back. I ran to my mom, and she asked me what on earth I was doing. I told her how I thought she had left, and the man told me she was in the parking lot. My mom told me that she would never leave without me, and that she had been looking for me in the store for the last 5 minutes. My mom then went and found a manager and reported what had happened. The police ended up coming as well, and we had to talk to them for a while before we could finally go home. My mom didn't leave me out of her sights for a while after that. I always get creeped out thinking about that day. I'm a big sports fan. I often go to games, and last summer I was at a Major League Baseball game in the city near where I live. I went with my friend Sean, who is also a big fan, and our seats were on the first level, sort of down by the first baseline. They were really nice, and the stadium was pretty full with it being a nice summer night. I remember it was about the 7th inning when I checked my phone after I felt it vibrate in my pocket. It was an airdrop request from another iPhone. The name of the phone just said iPhone. I was curious of what it could be, and I chose to accept the airdrop. It was a photo, and the photo turned out to be me. The photo looked really zoomed in, and it looked like it had been taken from the upper deck near the third base line. I thought it was funny, and I showed it to Sean, who also got a laugh out of it. We were wondering if someone who knew us was at the game and just joking around with us. I looked over to the upper deck area, but really couldn't see the people well with them being so far away. I went on Snapchat and looked at my snap maps, but nobody else that I knew was at the game. As the game went on, the next inning, I received another airdrop. This time, it was once again a photo of me zoomed in, but now there was a red X drawn over my face. I thought it was funny again, but also a little bit strange. The next inning, which was the 9th and the last inning of the game, I got another airdrop. It was a video of somebody zooming into me. This time, however, it appeared to be filmed from the same section that I was in and behind me, just about 20 feet or so. I looked around, but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. It could have been anyone, and with as many people at the game as there was no way of knowing. The game ended shortly after, and Sean and I walked through the dense crowd back to my car, which was in a nearby parking garage a few blocks away. When we got back to my car and got inside, I was starting up the engine when I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I grabbed it and looked to see another airdrop. It was from the same person, and I accepted it to see that now there appeared to be a note entry. The entry had my name with my address and then had in all caps, "I will get you." I knew that to send an airdrop you had to be close by to the iPhone, and Sean and I looked all around the parking garage. Now this was really creepy. We didn't see anybody, but all of a sudden we saw a car that was parked sort of behind us start to drive away, and the tires screeched as it did. It was a black car with tinted windows, and I didn't recognize it. After it sped away, Sean and I sat in the car for several minutes talking about who it could be that kept airdropping us. We really didn't know of anybody who would pull a prank like that. I didn't end up telling anybody else about it. Luckily for me though, nothing else happened, but I still want to know who that was taking those pictures of me. I currently work as a janitor for a college near where I live. The campus is about a 10-minute drive away, and I typically work from 7 p.m. until about midnight. It's not too long, and I'm a part-time worker. This is a job I'm working to get some extra money while I save up for grad school. I work in the school's athletics building. All in all, it's a pretty easy job. Just typical cleaning of bathrooms, locker rooms, changing garbage cans, mopping, all that stuff. The building is nice, but the school is pretty small, only about 1,500 students, so it's nothing massive or anything like that. This was just this past spring, and the building, which closed at 11, was now empty aside from me. I was changing garbage down at one end of the building, near the south entrance. As I was doing this, I noticed the window right next to the doors. There was a man standing there looking in, right at me. This guy was smiling in the creepiest possible smile that he could have. I almost jumped back when I saw him. I looked at the guy, and his eyes were locked onto mine. I had to look away. The building was closed, and I don't know if this guy was wanting to get inside or just weird. He remained there, and I went back to work, trying to ignore him, as hard as that was to do. A few moments later, I looked back, and he was now gone. I was happy to see that. I continued with my work, and about 20 minutes later, when I was on the complete opposite end of the building, I saw the man again. His head was peeking in the window, and he had that same creepy smile on his face. I knew this guy had to be playing some kind of creepy joke on me. He had grayish hair and a slight beard, but other than that, all I noticed was how insane and creepy he looked. Then, he suddenly disappeared, only to reappear again at another window a few minutes later. The guy was starting to annoy me, and I was tired of him doing this. I saw him again a little bit later near one of the large windows at the other side of the building. It's like he followed me wherever I went in the building and went to a window nearby just to stare at me. This time, I had it and began walking over to the door to ask this guy what his problem was. As soon as I started to walk over there, though, he ran away. I stopped and figured that it wasn't worth my time. I should just do my job and ignore this creepy guy. He was probably harmless. But just as I was returning to my work, I heard the sound of glass breaking behind me. I turned around to see what appeared to be a large rock crashing through the window and glass going everywhere. After things settled, the only thing I heard was an insane and creepy sounding laugh from the man. I got out my phone and called the police right away. I was hoping this guy wouldn't enter the building, but he seemed content to just stand by it and laugh. The police got there in like 5 minutes, where the guy was still standing outside. He was caught by the police, who found that the man appeared to be high on several drugs, which explained his bizarre behavior. As for me, I was just glad he was gone, but the building had to have the window replaced. This story took place last summer. I live by myself in a small house, and it's in a pretty big neighborhood where the houses are sort of close together, so I get to know most of my neighbors. The house next door to me to the west was for sale, and finally somebody bought it. I saw that a middle-aged guy moved into the house, but beyond that, I didn't know much. As the time went by after that, the guy seemed sort of creepy and elusive. He always had an angry look on his face and rarely came outside. When he did, he would just sort of stand outside and look around, or get his mail. I tried to have conversations with him a couple of times to be friendly, but they were quickly shut down. For the most part, I just tried to give the guy his privacy and figured he just liked to be alone. Then one night, I woke up at 3 a.m. and was very thirsty. I went into my kitchen to get some water. As I did, I noticed that the neighbor was outside, sort of between my house and his, and seemed to be pacing back and forth. This was strange to see, as it was the middle of the night. The guy then went back inside and came out less than a minute later. He then looked up at me and we made eye contact. The man looked really surprised and then walked quickly back inside. It felt really awkward to me that he had seen me staring at him. I went back to bed, but by the next day I had forgotten all about it. I didn't see the man at all that day. The next night, I once again awoke at 3 o'clock in the morning. This time, I wasn't as thirsty though. I sat up in bed and looked at the time, then I rolled back over to my other side to get some more sleep. As soon as I laid down, I heard a noise. It was a very small noise of something touching my window. I then sat back up again. I listened closely, and it sounded like there was a light tapping coming from my bedroom window. Then came a noise which was much louder than the others. I reached for my light switch and turned my light on. It revealed a silhouette of a man coming from behind the blinds outside my bedroom window. Whoever it was quickly ran away and went out of sight. I got up and walked around the house after that and looked out of all of my windows, but I didn't see anything strange. Then I went back up to my bedroom, and it took a while before I was able to fall back asleep. The next day, I went all around my yard and looked for any evidence if it was there the night before. Couldn't really find anything though. After that day though, I never saw my next door neighbor again. He must have left without anybody noticing, because a couple of months later, we just saw a for sale sign on the house and learned that the guy who lived there hadn't been there at all for months. I think it was him who I saw outside my bedroom window, but I don't know why he was there or what he was doing.
This is one of the most bizarre things to ever happen to me. I live out west, and there are Carl's Jr.'s all over the place near my house. It's become a popular stop for me to get food late at night, and I also think that they have a great breakfast. One night, about 6 months ago, I worked a little bit late, and I felt lazy, so I pulled into the Carl's Jr. drive-thru on my way home. When I got there, nobody else was in the drive-thru, and I drove right up to the speaker. I remember that shortly after stopping, I noticed a car pulling up right behind me though. As I was ordering at the intercom, the car behind me started honking. I was perplexed. I hadn't been ordering for a long time or anything. I hadn't even been at the intercom for more than 30 seconds. When I placed my order, I drove up and the car drove behind me. I don't even think that they had ordered. I went to the next window and was there for a while longer waiting. The car honked at me once again. I looked back to him, but it was night and I couldn't tell who was driving the car. There was a space for them to drive around me if they wanted to leave or something, but they didn't. Within a couple of minutes, I had paid and got my order, and then I left. I was glad to get away from there with that weirdo honking at me. I drove home, which took maybe 10 more minutes total. When I got back, I pulled into the driveway and was really hungry and tired from work. As I got out of my car, I saw another car driving right up to the front of my house onto the street. The car then honked several times loudly and then sped away. It must have been the same car that was behind me in the Carl's Jr. drive-thru. I wasn't sure why they would have followed me home though. I was just glad that they had left. I went inside and finally got to eat. I was able to relax for a few hours before realizing that I had meant to go shopping that night on my way home from work. I had run out of many things, most of them foods, but some other things like toothpaste and toilet paper. The late workday must have caused me to forget. I thought about just going the next day, but there was a store right down the street like 2 or 3 minutes away, and it was only 9 p.m., so I decided to go. I went to the local supermarket and was there for probably about 10 minutes. When I was there, I was pretty quick to get all the basic stuff that I needed. After that, I drove back home and returned. When I got back, I parked my car in the driveway and began walking up to my front door. When I reached the front step, I realized something. The window next to the front door was broken. It was sort of tough to see because it was mostly covered by a bush, but I saw it. I knew that it hadn't been like that earlier when I had gotten home. Somebody had broken into my house and was probably still there. I turned around and ran back to my car. Once I was there, I called the police and waited inside my car for them. When they got there, they searched my entire house and property. Unfortunately, though, they never found anybody inside. Whoever had been there had left. When I finally got inside my house, nothing was missing. The only evidence was that broken window, and the back door was unlocked, indicating whoever broke in left that way. I never did find out who had been inside of my house, or who was honking in the car. Luckily, since then, nothing else strange has happened, but I have to think that the strange car that kept honking at me and the break-in were connected.
About a year ago, one of my best friends from back in high school was in town. He lived far away, and me and him met up at Applebee's just like old times. We would always go to half-price apps when we were younger, and that's what we were doing on this night. Once we got there, we sat down in a booth and began catching up. It was great to see him again,
But shortly after we had ordered, I noticed he was looking out the window, and then he pointed. He said, "Hey, isn't that your car?" I looked out the window to where he was pointing at. From where we were sitting, you could see out into the parking lot, which didn't have too many cars in it. I noticed that there appeared to be a man standing on the other side of my car doing something to it. It looked as though maybe he was trying to break in, so I said I would be right back, and I got up. I then ran outside to the parking lot. By the time I got outside, I didn't see the man anymore. I walked over to my car and examined it. It was still locked, and nothing seemed to be different about it at all. I looked around the whole parking lot and the nearby surroundings. The man was definitely gone now. I went back inside the restaurant to my friend. He told me that as I was going out the door, which was at an angle that I couldn't see the parking lot really, the man looked over to the window and then ran off. It sort of creeped me out to hear that, but I was glad that he was now gone and my car was okay. Over time, I forgot all about it as we were talking and eating. Afterwards, we went back to our cars and went our separate ways. I drove back home, which was about a 10-minute drive to my little house I lived by myself in. I pulled into my driveway on a quiet street and my car came to a stop. As soon as I did, I was about to go inside when I suddenly saw bright lights of headlights behind me. I looked to see 3 separate cars suddenly pulling up from around the corner and all screeching to a stop, blocking my driveway. I was basically halfway outside my car door, and I scrambled to run inside my house. The cars must have had their brights on, because I was nearly blinded as I ran to my front step. I got to my front door, unlocked it, and then went inside. I then locked the doors right behind me. I didn't hear anybody get out of the cars, but I started to hear almost constant honking. This went on for more than a minute straight before I heard a car door open and shut. I got out my phone to call the police, but before I even placed the call, I heard a door shut again, and then screeching tires and cars speeding away. I went upstairs, which had a good view of outside, and I looked out the window. I saw that all of the cars were now gone, and the street was now quiet like usual again. The cars never came back after that. I think they might have been connected with the guy that was messing with my car in the parking lot earlier. But what was going on there, I have no idea.
I work at Domino's Pizza, and this is something that happened to me just a few months ago. Many times, I work late into the night. Being a popular pizza place, we stay open until 1 a.m. on weeknights and 3 a.m. on weekends. However, we are only open for deliveries during the last 2 hours, so nobody can come inside to order, and there are no carry-out orders during those hours. I work until close all the time, and I don't really mind it because the pay is good. Normally, I work inside the building making pizzas or helping customers. I don't really do deliveries. On this night in particular, it was a Friday night, so I was working until 3 a.m. Generally, we're pretty busy for most of the night on weekends, but things quiet down around midnight significantly. At least at my location, they do. During the last couple of hours, it was just me and 2 other coworkers. We handled a few orders, and when it was just after 2 a.m., things got even quieter. I was hanging out in the back with them, and I happened to go to the front of the store to get something, and noticed that there was a man standing right outside, looking in the window. That window led to a small parking lot outside. This man was sort of thin, tall, and was just staring. I thought maybe he had tried to come inside, but our door was locked. The guy kept staring in, but then when he saw me, he started banging on the window. And I don't mean just knocking on the window. He was banging on it. One of my coworkers came over and saw the guy. I told him that I would handle the situation and tell the guy that we were only open for deliveries. At that moment, I think we had gotten an order, and my coworker went back to start it. I walked over to the front door. The front door was around the corner to the window that the guy was banging on. I opened the door and then leaned around the corner. I told the guy that we were only open for deliveries and our store was not open. He looked at me and then just walked away. He didn't say anything, but I guess that he got the picture. I went back to help with the order that we had gotten. After it was complete, a driver took it out for delivery. Some more time went by, and it was probably about 2:45 a.m. We were going to be closing very soon, and wouldn't take any more orders. That's when I saw the guy again. I saw that he was once again just staring in the window. He didn't bang on the window this time, but he was just staring at me. Wherever I went, he wouldn't take his eyes off me. I walked back to the front door and opened it a crack. I yelled out asking if the guy needed something. He didn't respond. He just kept staring at me. I asked if he was okay, but still got no reply. The guy was acting very strange, and I asked him to stop staring in our windows. The whole time, though, he just stood there looking at me. As I closed the door and went back inside, he kept his eyes on me the whole time. I decided to just ignore him then. He wasn't banging on the glass anymore, and we would be closing now, so I figured he would just go away. I went into the back and helped clean some things up. We closed, and my coworkers left. I was the last person there to finish some things up and then leave. I then left the store maybe 10 minutes after my other coworkers, not that much later at all. I did one last look at the front of the store, and the man was no longer there. Then I left. As I walked out the back door of the Domino's to the parking lot, I got halfway to my car before I heard footsteps. The parking lot was very dark at this time, so I couldn't really see much. I looked over though and saw a figure walking towards me. I squinted and realized that it was the same guy who had been staring in the window of the store. He then started to run towards me. We were maybe about 30 feet apart. I then ran for my car and got inside just before the guy reached me. I drove out of there as fast as I could. The guy banged on my car with his fists as I did. I left him standing there in the parking lot, and luckily, after that I didn't see him again. I have no clue who he was or what he wanted with me.
This story happened just a couple of months ago. It was summertime, and I went to a music festival with my friend Robin one Friday. It was a pretty large event, and they had all kinds of performers on different stages around the area. It was in a sort of big park in the city, and after getting there, we went to several different stages and went all around the whole venue. We spent a decent amount of time at a few different stages, and by the time we went home, it was around midnight. Where the story really starts, though, is the next day. When I woke up in the morning, I saw that I had several missed calls and voicemails on my phone from a number that I did not recognize. It seemed really strange, and I decided to play the messages. At first, I couldn't make them out at all, and I had no idea what was going on. I thought somebody must have called me by complete accident, but the fact that there were 4 messages seemed odd. After playing the messages again, I was putting my phone right up to my ear, and I was able to make out music in the background. I could hear crowd noise as well as music, and I realized that the music playing was the same music as the performers I had seen the night before. There were 5 messages, and each message was from a song that I had heard, but 3 of them were at completely different stages. The crazy thing is, they were each stages that I had been to when songs were played that I had also been to. I found this really freaky, and I had to tell Robin all about it. I hadn't given my number to anybody who was there, so this was just really bizarre. All of the phone calls had taken place between 5 a.m. and 5:30 a.m. when I was asleep. I just didn't know how to explain it, but I did my best to just shrug it off. It was that night when I was by myself watching a movie in my bedroom when I received another phone call. It was about 11 p.m. and I thought about answering the call, but ultimately decided not to because I was too nervous. I had no idea who this was that was calling, and I didn't know what I would say or anything like that. I let it go to voicemail, and whoever it was left another one. I was nervous and waited a few minutes, but then I played it, expecting to maybe hear another song, but instead I heard something else. I put it up to my ear once again, and it was quieter this time, but it sounded like a movie. Then I realized what it was. It was the same movie I was watching. I remembered that my bedroom window was open. It was summer, so I'd have it open a lot at night. I looked over, but thankfully nobody was there when I looked. It was sort of behind me and out of my vision, so I ran, closed it immediately. I didn't know if the guy was still on my property somewhere, but I didn't want to stay there and find out, so I called my parents and told them about it, and then left my house and drove all the way to my parents' house, 15 minutes away, and spent the night there. There was absolutely no chance I was going to stay in my house that night. I spent a few nights back at my parents', and we went back to my place to look around a few times, but since then, there has been nothing. I'm hoping whoever it is never bothers me again.
This story occurred many years ago when I was a kid. I was probably about 8 years old, and I remember that one day I went with my mother to go to the post office. She had to send something in the mail, and I don't remember what it was exactly, but I think it was a bigger package, so we had to go to the post office to mail it.
It was pretty rare for us to go to the post office, and I always thought it was kind of interesting. When we got there, I remembered that it was really busy. We lived in the city, so the local post office usually had a line of people, and my mother and I got in the end of the line and began waiting. I waited in line with my mother for a while, but I got bored the longer we waited. Eventually, it was my mother's turn, and she began to talk with somebody at the front counter. It took a little longer than I thought it would, and I wandered off to look at some of the things around the post office. It was a pretty interesting one. They had sort of displays and a lot of posters on the wall of information and things like that, probably because it was so large and busy all the time. I went over to look at a cool stamp collection poster thing that they had. It was something that really interested me at the time. I was there for maybe 2 minutes when all of a sudden my wrist was grabbed and I was pulled away. I looked up and saw a woman who I did not know leading me towards the doorway of the post office. I had no idea who she was, and I was so confused I thought maybe she worked at the post office. But after looking at her, she clearly didn't. She wasn't even looking at me, but just walking towards the exit, grabbing my wrist. The place was pretty crowded, so nobody really seemed to notice. She had a tight grip around my wrist, and as we were almost at the door, I remember finally another woman asked her what she was doing. The woman then stopped and said that she was leaving with her son. The other woman turned to me and asked me if this was my mom, and I said no. The woman must have seen how suspicious this situation looked. The woman who had a hold of my arm then said that I was just being difficult and laughed a little. My mother was still over at the counter at the time, and the post office was so big and crowded that I could barely see her from where I was, and I'm sure she had no idea what was going on. After the woman who I was with claimed I was in fact her son, she began walking quickly out the doors. I heard the other woman say to wait, but we went out the doors without stopping. After we made it outside, the woman led me directly around to the side of the building and onto the sidewalk. We were walking along the street, and the further we got away from the post office, the more worried I became. We walked for probably about a minute, until I started to hear a little shouting coming from behind us. I could hear the woman who had been questioning me at the post office, and then I heard my mother's voice as well. The woman that I was with began running and telling me to run as well. We were being chased, but I didn't want to run. The woman tried picking me up, but in the process of running, tripped a little, and I fell to the ground. The woman stumbled after bumping into me and nearly fell. She ended up letting go of me at that point and running away while I stayed on the ground. My mother and the other woman from the post office caught up to me quickly and brought me back. The police got called to the post office after that. I remember being told a while later that the lady who had tried to kidnap me was caught. I'm really grateful to the other woman who saw what was going on and questioned it, or I don't know what would have happened.